Thanks for joining. Find your most relaxing position, take a slow breath in, and let's begin our very quiet stroll through history. We'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment if you'd like to share. You snap awake to the sound of coughing. It's not yours this time, but your neighbour hacking up a lung through the thin walls of the tenement. Welcome to 19th century urban life, where ventilation is a luxury, not a given, and the best alarm clock money can't buy. But, alas, you don't have any money, do you? The Industrial Revolution hasn't exactly made you a titan of industry, but more like a cog in its grimy machine. Now, let's get you out of that straw mattress and onto the filth-encrusted streets of a rapidly industrializing city. The Industrial Revolution has turned places like Manchester and Birmingham into sprawling metropolises, but not the glass and steel kind you might be dreaming of. No, these are cities where the air is thick enough to chew and the smell of coal hangs like a permanent fog. Welcome to the dark satanic mills of Blake's nightmares, except you don't just visit these nightmares, you live them. Your day begins before the sun even thinks about rising. It's 5 a.m, and you've already got a full docket. First, there's the matter of navigating the communal washroom without catching something worse than what you might already have. The statistics aren't on your side here. Nearly half of all children born in these urban slums don't make it past age 5. And while you may have dodged that particular bullet, the battle isn't over yet. Cholera, typhoid, and a variety of unmentionable diseases are still lurking around every corner, like villains in a penny dreadful. The tenement you call home is part of a tangled mass of slum housing. The kind of place where you get to know your neighbours, whether you want to or not, thanks to walls that are more suggestion than structure. Privacy is a modern invention, one you won't be seeing in your lifetime. Half a dozen people cram into a space the size of a modern walk-in closet. If you're lucky, you've got a window, albeit one that hasn't been opened since who knows when, because it's sealed shut by layers of soot and grime. You make your way down rickety stairs, trying not to trip over the assortment of buckets and pans left out to catch the leaks because, surprise, the roof leaks even when it isn't raining. Outside, the streets are alive with the bustle of workers, just like you, dragging themselves to the factories that have transformed the landscape. These aren't the bustling market scenes of a Renaissance fair. No colourful tents or cheerful merchants here. Instead, the stalls offer a smorgasbord of dubious goods, from questionable meats to even more dubious, fresh produce. Now keep your head down and your scarf up. The smog is omnipresent, and a deep breath of that glorious air is likely to leave your lungs feeling like you've inhaled a fireplace. The air quality is so bad that the death rate from respiratory diseases is through the roof, literally, because the soot settles everywhere, from chimneys to your very lungs. And while we're on the subject of roofs, look up. Those chimneys are puking out smoke day and night, contributing to a skyline that's more apocalyptic than picturesque. You're on your way to work, and no, you don't have the luxury of a leisurely commute. The factory is your destination, but before you get there, let's take a moment to appreciate your surroundings, or, perhaps, lack thereof. This is the heart of the Industrial Revolution, and it's as far from a technological utopia as you can get. The factories loom large, mechanical behemoths fueled by steam and sweat. They're not cathedrals of progress, but engines of profit, and your labour is the coal that keeps them running. You thread your way through a thicket of people, animals, and the occasional cart, all vying for the same narrow pathways. Transportation isn't a joyride here, it's more of a survival course. Even the streets seem to conspire against you, filled with the muck and mire of a city that hasn't quite figured out waste management. And speaking of waste, let's not dwell too long on what's floating down the gutter. Just know that stepping in a puddle can be an olfactory adventure you didn't sign up for. As you near the factory, the noise becomes a physical presence. The sound of machinery clanking away is relentless, echoing off the buildings and making it impossible to hear yourself think. But who needs thoughts when your day is about to be filled with repetitive, mind-numbing tasks? You're not here to innovate, you're here to endure. And endurance is the name of the game because, let's face it, complaining isn't going to put food on the table or keep the landlord from knocking on your door. But before you step into this industrial hellscape, take a moment to consider what made all this possible. The Industrial Revolution didn't spring up overnight. It was a slow, grinding process fueled by human ambition, scientific discovery, and, of course, a whole lot of exploitation. And while it brought about the kind of economic growth that makes economists swoon, it also created a class of workers living life on the edge, literally and metaphorically. So, there you are, poised at the precipice of another grueling day. The factory doors loom ahead, promising hours of hard labour with little reward. Behind you, the city continues its relentless, smog-choked march into modernity. You're caught in the middle, a pawn in a game that doesn't much care whether you win or lose. But hey, at least you've got your health sort of. And if not, well, there's always a doctor willing to bleed you for a few coins. Welcome to the vibrant world of the Victorian factory worker. Best of luck, you'll need it. And here you are, standing at the threshold of the industrial beast itself, the factory. The doors yawn open, ready to swallow you whole for the next 12 to 14 hours. Yes, you heard that right. While your modern sensibilities might balk at a workday stretching past 8 hours, this was the norm in the Victorian era. Forget about overtime pay or coffee breaks. Your only respite might be a quick lunch of bread and cheese, assuming you can spare the pennies for such luxuries. The factory floor is a cacophony of noise and motion. Machinery clatters away like a mad orchestra, and the air is thick with the scent of oil, sweat, and desperation. You're not just stepping into a building, you're entering a world where the machines are the real masters. They dictate the pace, and you must keep up or risk becoming part of the grim statistics. Did you know that in 1833 the Factory Act limited children aged 9 to 13 to a mere 48-hour work week? That's progress for you. As you navigate the factory, you can't ignore the ever-present danger. The machines are temperamental beasts, built more for function than safety. They're like that one relative everyone has, you know the one, barely holds together but demands constant attention. In 1842, a parliamentary report revealed that factory accidents were as common as bad weather in England. Workers lost fingers, limbs, and sometimes their lives, all in the name of industry. Safety regulations? Please. Those are as fictional as a unicorn in a top hat. And let's talk about the air quality, shall we? While modern factories might boast of air conditioning and ventilation systems, your lungs here are on their own. The air is a choking mix of dust, lint, and whatever else can find its way into your respiratory system. Workers often suffered from factory fever, a delightful cocktail of respiratory issues that made breathing feel like a luxury. It's a wonder anyone made it to the ripe old age of 40. The myth of glorious progress is a hard one to swallow when you're knee-deep in reality. Sure, the Industrial Revolution brought about technological advancements that would eventually lead to the modern conveniences we enjoy today. But let's not forget the human cost. The romantic notion of progress often glosses over the fact that it was built on the backs of workers like you, toiling away in conditions that modern audiences would find appalling. This isn't just my opinion, it's backed by those who lived it. Consider the words of James Miles, a factory worker who in 1856 described how children were strapped until black in the face to keep them awake. If that doesn't paint a vivid picture, I don't know what will. The factory owners, of course, had their own narratives. They claimed that industrial work provided necessary employment and economic growth. While that's partially true, it ignores the exploitation that was rampant in these dark, satanic mills. Now, about those wages. You're putting in a full day's work, but don't expect to see much for it. The average factory worker earned mere pennies per hour, with women and children making even less. You might earn just enough to keep a roof over your head and food in your stomach, but luxuries like education or healthcare. Dream on. This economic disparity laid the groundwork for future labour movements, but that's a story for another day. The factory is a microcosm of the larger societal shifts happening during the Industrial Revolution. It highlights the clash between progress and exploitation, between the promise of a brighter future and the grim reality of the present. While the industrialists might have been living the high life, you and your fellow workers were living life on the edge, both literally and metaphorically. As the day drags on, the monotony sets in. The repetitive tasks are mind-numbing, but you can't afford to let your mind wander. A moment's distraction could cost you a finger, or worse. The machines demand your full attention, and the overseers are there to make sure you comply. They're the unsmiling sentinels of the factory floor, always ready to crack down on any perceived slacking. The factory floor is a study in contrasts. It's a place of incredible innovation, yet also of incredible exploitation. It's where the dreams of industrialists collide with the harsh realities faced by workers. The noise, the danger, and the relentless pace are enough to make anyone question the so-called glories of industrial progress. And yet, despite all this, there's a certain resilience among the workers. They form tight-knit communities, sharing what little they have and supporting one another in the face of adversity. It's this spirit of camaraderie that will eventually drive the labour movements and reforms that start to change the industrial landscape. But for now, your focus is on surviving the day, making it through the relentless grind until the factory doors finally release you back into the smog-filled streets. So there you have it, a day in the life of a Victorian factory worker. It's a world of harsh realities and little reward, but also of resilience and camaraderie. The Industrial Revolution may have been a time of progress, but it was also a time of profound human struggle. And as you step back out into the streets, you can't help but appreciate the modern conveniences that were born from this era, even as you acknowledge the high price that was paid for them. And just like that, you're spat back into the Victorian streets, where the air is a smorgasbord of coal dust and regret. But hold up, before you traipse too far, let's talk sustenance, or the sorry excuse for it. Forget about a leisurely lunch break, you've got maybe 20 minutes to wolf down whatever you manage to scrounge together. And by scrounge, I mean the culinary equivalent of a sad trombone, bread and weak tea. Let's set the scene. It's the mid-1800s, and your midday meal is as luxurious as a beige cardigan. Bread is the mainstay, flour, water, and a pinch of hope if you're lucky. Maybe you can stretch to a slice of cheese, but only if payday's been kind. And tea? It's less a comforting brew and more a tepid, leaf-flavoured water, since the good stuff is reserved for those with actual disposable income. High tea is a concept for the high and mighty, not for you, my friend. While your stomach grumbles like a distant thunderstorm, let's talk about the littlest cogs in this industrial machine, the kids. Victorian factories didn't just exploit adults, they had a particular knack for squeezing every last ounce of labour out of the younger generation. Children as young as 5 were put to work, and not in the cute lemonade stand way. No, we're talking 14-hour days, in conditions that would make a modern OSHA inspector's head explode. But why, you ask, were children subjected to such abysmal conditions? Here's the economic lowdown. The Industrial Revolution brought about a demand for cheap labour, and kids fit the bill perfectly. They were small, nimble, and most importantly, didn't need to be paid much. In fact, a child's wage often amounted to a whopping 10 to 20% of an adult's. So, if an adult took home 15 shillings a week, a child might earn a princely sum of 1.5. That's roughly enough for a loaf of bread and not much else. Now, you might be wondering why parents allowed this. Well, when you're living in a slum where half your children might not survive past infancy, every little bit helps. It was a grim game of survival, and the societal norms of the time didn't really offer a lifeline. The prevailing attitude was that poverty was a moral failing, not a systemic issue. So, families did what they had to do, even if it meant sending their kids into the maw of industrial progress. Child labour wasn't just a side effect of the Victorian economy, it was a feature. The Factory Act of 1833 was one of the first attempts to regulate this madness, limiting children aged 9-13 to a mere 9 hours of work a day. But enforcement was as spotty as a Dalmatian, and many factory owners found creative ways to skirt the rules. After all, profit margins were the real gods of this era, and they demanded sacrifices. Let's take a moment to talk about the social attitudes that enabled this exploitation. The Victorian era was steeped in the self-help ideology, popularized by Samuel Smiles. Yes, that's a real name. The idea was simple. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and if you fail, well, that's on you. This mindset permeated society, justifying the harsh conditions as a necessary evil on the path to progress. It was a time when the wealthy elite could wax poetic about the virtues of hard work while sipping brandy in their well-appointed drawing rooms, blissfully ignorant of the reality faced by those at the bottom. The myth of the self-made man was powerful, romanticizing the notion that anyone could rise from rags to riches through sheer grit. But the reality was far more complex. The barriers to upward mobility were as real as the smog choking the air. Social safety nets? Non-existent. Worker rights? A pipe dream. And yet, this myth endured, offering a comforting narrative for those who benefited from the status quo. As for the children, they were seen as mini-adults, expected to contribute to the family income as soon as they were able. Childhood, as we understand it today, was a luxury reserved for the affluent. For the working class, life was a relentless grind from the moment you could walk, often with little hope of escape. The cost of Victorian prosperities was paid in the sweat and tears of these young workers, a grim testament to the dark side of industrial progress. So, there you are, sitting on a rickety bench, chewing on your slice of bread, and pondering the state of the world. The factory whistle beckons you back to the grind, but your mind lingers on the bigger picture. The Industrial Revolution may have laid the groundwork for modernity, but it did so on the backs of those who had no choice but to endure its harsh realities. As you trudge back to the factory, the weight of history presses down. You're part of a vast machine, one that promises progress but demands a steep toll. The romantic sheen of industrial advancement quickly tarnishes when you look at it up close. And yet, amidst the grime and toil, is a flicker of resilience, a stubborn determination to survive against the odds. The Victorian factory worker's story isn't just about hardship. It's about the indomitable spirit of those who refused to be ground down by the gears of industry. They forged communities, supported one another, and laid the groundwork for the labour movements that would eventually bring about change. But for now, your focus is on making it through the day, one bread and tea lunch at a time. And as the factory doors swallow you once more, remember this: the cost of progress is often measured in human lives. The sweat and sacrifice of countless workers paved the way for the conveniences we enjoy today. So, next time you sip a robust cup of tea or enjoy a leisurely lunch, spare a thought for those who didn't have that luxury. The Industrial Revolution was a time of great change, but it was also a time of great struggle, a struggle that shaped the world we live in now. As you're swallowed back into the belly of the industrial beast, the afternoon shift stretches out before you like a Dickensian marathon. Now, if you're thinking that the morning was tough, the afternoon is where the Victorian factory truly shows its claws. Let's chat about the delightful cocktail of hazards that awaits you. First up, let's talk lungs. You know, those handy little things that help you breathe? Well, here they're less organs and more sacrificial offerings. The air is a gritty soup of dust, soot, and who knows what else, a recipe for respiratory disaster. Think of it as breathing through a chimney, except you're the one getting smoked. Pneumoconiosis, or black lung, was about as common as a cup of weak tea. And asthma? It wasn't just for the genteel ladies clutching their pearls. It was a grim reality for many a factory worker. Now, let's not forget the rest of your body, which is also playing a high-stakes game of, will I survive today? The machines, those mechanical behemoths, are all appetite and no conscience. Fingers, hands, limbs. These are just acceptable losses in the name of productivity. In fact, injuries were so frequent that by the mid-1800s they were practically a rite of passage. Welcome to the factory, here's your apron and your first aid kit. But surely, you might wonder, there were safety regulations, right? Well, if by regulations you mean the factory owner's vague promise not to actively murder you, then sure. Real safety protocols were as rare as a unicorn sighting. It wasn't until the Factory Act of 1844 that any meaningful talk of safeguarding workers began, and even then it was more of a polite suggestion than an enforceable law. After all, why invest in safety when you can just replace injured workers with the next desperate soul in line? It's no wonder that the grim reality of factory work eventually sparked outrage and a demand for change. Enter the labour movements, the unsung heroes of your story, slowly but surely dragging the industrial world kicking and screaming toward reform. Like a tortoise in molasses, progress was painstakingly slow, but it was progress nonetheless. The mid-19th century saw the first flickers of organised labour unions, groups of workers who realised that strength in numbers might just be their ticket to better conditions. The Chartists, for instance, were advocating for political rights and suffrage, which included a push for better labour laws. These movements were the beginning of a long and arduous journey toward reforms that would take decades to materialise. But don't get too comfy in your daydreams of future labour rights. The powers that be weren't exactly rolling out the red carpet for these movements. Many factory owners viewed unions as a direct threat to their bottom line, and they had no qualms about squashing them like an inconvenient bug. Strike action was often met with aggressive crackdowns, and union organisers were sometimes tossed out on their ears, or worse. One can't ignore the glacial pace of change. It wasn't until 1878 that the Factory and Workshop Act significantly improved conditions, and even then, it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a teacup of water. Factory owners were more interested in profit margins than workers' health. Why install costly safety measures when a worker's life was cheaper than a bolt of cloth? This brings us to the crux of the matter. The Victorian era was a time of great innovation, sure, but also of rampant exploitation. It's easy to romanticize the era of steam and steel, to wax lyrical about the marvels of progress. But let's not forget the human cost of those gleaming achievements. The factories were the dark underbelly of the industrial age, a place where dreams were ground down as surely as the gears turned. Yet, amidst the soot and despair, there was a flicker of hope. Workers began to realize that they weren't just voiceless cogs in the industrial machine. They were a force to be reckoned with, and their collective will could bring about change. This realization laid the groundwork for the labor rights we often take for granted today. So, as the afternoon grinds on, you soldier through the relentless din of machinery and the stifling air. But now, with a growing awareness that your plight is shared and that change is possible, albeit as slow as a Victorian steam engine, you might not see the fruits of your labor in your lifetime, but your endurance and resilience are planting the seeds for future generations to enjoy a world where workers aren't merely expendable parts. As the day drags on and the sun begins its slow descent, you can almost taste the end of your shift. But before you get too excited, remember that the impact of this era's labor movements would be felt long after the factory whistle blows. The fight for workers' rights was a marathon, not a sprint, and every small victory was a step toward a better, fairer world. So, as you wipe the grime off your brow and prepare to leave for the day, remember this. The story of the Victorian factory worker is not just one of hardship, but also of resilience and change. The slow crawl towards reform may have been frustratingly sluggish, but it was relentless. Each demand for better conditions, each call for reform, was a strike against the chains of exploitation. As you step back into the smog-laden streets, you're not just a worker stumbling home after a hard day's labor. You are part of a larger narrative, one that stretches far beyond your own struggles. The Industrial Revolution might have been a time of great technological advancement, but it was also a period of profound social change, and while the bosses might have been slow to care about health and safety, the workers were beginning to find their voice. A voice that would echo through the centuries, demanding justice and equality. And so, the story continues, with more challenges and triumphs ahead. But that's a tale for another time. For now, you can take pride in your role as an unsung hero of history, paving the way for a future where workers aren't just disposable assets, but valued contributors to society. Keep your chin up and your wits about you. The fight for progress is far from over. And so, your shift finally ends, and you stagger out of the factory like you've just survived a war, because in many ways you have. The sun is setting, casting a dim light over streets that look like they've been dusted with charcoal. Your body aches in ways you didn't think possible, but hey, at least you're still in one piece. Barely. As you make your way home through the murk of industrial Britain, it's a good time to reflect on why this grueling day matters in the grand scheme of history. The Victorian factory system, for all its grime and grind, was the unwelcome architect of modern labour rights. It took the Victorian era's brutal work conditions to ignite the spark of change. Picture it, a world where the air quality could be bottled and sold as a new form of punishment, where 12-hour workdays were standard and where safety measures were about as common as unicorns in bowler hats. Yet, out of this chaos, a movement began, a fight that would redefine what it meant to be a worker. Let's talk numbers. By the late 19th century, labour unions were gaining serious traction. In 1871, the Trade Union Act finally legalised these worker coalitions, officially recognising their right to exist. It was like finally being allowed to bring an umbrella to a rainstorm. By 1900, union membership had soared to over 2 million in Britain alone. And these weren't just folks gathering for a chinwag. They were a force to be reckoned with, demanding change with the kind of tenacity that only comes from being thoroughly done with everyone's nonsense. This period of history laid the groundwork for legislation that would make your modern-day work benefits look positively luxurious. The Factory and Workshop Act of 1901 was a game-changer, reducing work hours for women and children to a more humane 55 hours per week. Still not quite a holiday, but hey, progress is progress. It's easy to romanticize the notion of the noble worker fighting the good fight, but let's not sugarcoat it. These changes didn't come easy. They were hard won, often at the cost of jobs, livelihoods, and sometimes lives. Now, why does all this matter? Because the grimy beginnings of the Victorian factory system didn't just affect the people of that era, they set in motion the wheels of change that continue to spin today. The labour movements that sprang from these conditions forced society to rethink the value of human labour. They challenged the notion that profit should come at the expense of dignity and safety. These weren't just battles won in dusty boardrooms or fiery speeches. They were fought on the factory floors, in the grim shadows where steel met sweat. Social policies too began to evolve as a result of these movements. By 1911, Britain introduced the National Insurance Act, which, believe it or not, was the country's first real attempt at social welfare. It was a modest safety net, covering sickness and unemployment for workers. Think of it as the ancestor of modern social security systems, a system that today seems like a basic human right but was once a radical notion. It's essential to acknowledge the resilience of those who endured these conditions. They were the unsung heroes, the ones who didn't have the luxury of waiting for change but had to forge it themselves. The factory workers, standing shoulder to shoulder, were like the coal that fueled the very machines they operated, indispensable yet often overlooked. As you finally drag yourself home, the tenement looms like a familiar nightmare. The walls might be thin, and the air might still be a cocktail of diseases waiting to happen, but there's a hint of camaraderie that makes it bearable. You share stories, swap grievances, and maybe, just maybe, find some hope in the shared struggle. The community formed in these harsh conditions became a breeding ground for the kind of social change that would transform the world. The legacy of the Victorian factory system is a reminder of the power of collective action. It's a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of times, people can come together to demand a better future. And while it's tempting to look back with rose-tinted glasses, imagining a time of quaint cobblestone streets and charming Dickensian characters, the reality was a gritty fight for survival. In the end, the story of the Victorian worker is one of resilience and progress. The hardships they faced were not in vain. They were the crucible in which modern labour rights were forged. So as you collapse onto your straw mattress, still feeling the echoes of the day's toil in your bones, know this: you are part of a legacy that reshaped the world. And as you drift off to sleep, you might find solace in knowing that the struggles of the past have paved the way for a future where workers are more than just cogs in a machine. The fight isn't over, never is, but each step toward progress builds on the last, pushing society ever closer to a world where dignity and respect are the norm, not the exception. So close your eyes and let the day's exhaustion give way to dreams of a better tomorrow. After all, if history teaches us anything, it's that even the darkest days can lead to brighter futures. And when you wake up, remember that the story of labour rights is still being written, one hard-fought battle at a time. Erik the Red was the kind of guy who'd look at a snow-covered wasteland and think, this could use a bit of branding. Picture a Norse explorer with a flair for PR, and you've got Erik, whose real name was Erik Thorvaldsson. Born around 950 AD in the icy climes of Norway, he was a redhead by nature, which, in the Viking world, was practically a calling card. His father, Thorvald Asvaldsson, was the kind of guy who couldn't resist a good dispute, so much so that he found himself exiled from Norway over a few too many quarrels. One man's tiff is another man's deportation, apparently, and thus began young Erik's adventure before he even had a say in it. The Asvaldsson family packed their things, which likely included a few sheep and a hefty amount of salted fish, and set sail for Iceland, a place that, despite its frosty reputation, was a burgeoning hotspot for displaced Norsemen. Iceland was the land of second chances, especially if your first chance involved being a bit too, shall we say, enthusiastic with your neighbours. By the time Erik was old enough to wield a sword and likely a comb for that fiery mane, he was already embroiled in his own set of disputes. It seems the apple didn't fall far from the outlaw tree. Erik's early years in Iceland were marked by a series of unfortunate events that would make any modern-day homeowner association blush. In one particularly infamous incident, Erik got into a spat over a set of chairs. Yes, you heard that right, chairs. It turns out that in a world without IKEA, furniture was a big deal. the disagreement escalated to the point where Erik was sentenced to lesser outlawry, which, in Viking terms, meant taking a 3-year sabbatical from Iceland. But let's not paint Erik as just another brawler. The Viking reputation for savagery is a bit of a historical oversimplification. Sure, they had a penchant for raiding and the occasional plundering, but they were also farmers, traders, and even lawmakers. Erik's banishment wasn't so much a reflection of Viking barbarism as it was a testament to their surprisingly sophisticated legal system. In this world, disputes were settled at things. Ancient Norse assemblies where a good argument could save your skin, or in Erik's case, lose you your home. So, Erik set sail once again, this time in search of new pastures, quite literally. His journey took him westward, across the choppy waters of the North Atlantic, where he eventually landed on a massive landmass covered in glaciers and fjords. Now, here's where Erik's marketing genius really shone through. Despite the chilly reception this new land offered, Erik dubbed it Greenland, a name that was about as honest as a used car salesman. But there was method to his madness. The name was meant to entice settlers. Erik knew that a land called Greenland would sound a whole lot more appealing than ice-covered rock in the middle of nowhere. Erik spent 3 years in Greenland exploring and establishing settlements. When his period of exile was up, he returned to Iceland with tales of the greener pastures he had found, or, more accurately, imagined. His sales pitch worked, and soon enough a fleet of settlers joined him on the voyage back to Greenland, ready to build a new life on this promising, if not slightly misleadingly named, territory. While Erik's story is often wrapped up in the romantic imagery of Viking adventure and exploration, the realities were far less glamorous. Imagine setting out into the unknown with only the stars and a prayer to guide you, knowing that at any moment a storm could send you to a watery grave. Yet the Norse people thrived in this harsh environment, not just because of their toughness, but because of their adaptability and ingenuity. They were master navigators, skilled craftsmen, and, as Erik's story shows, they had a knack for turning a bad situation into an opportunity. Erik the Red was a man of contradictions, a violent outlaw who became a pioneering settler, a savvy marketer who sold a frozen desert as a fertile paradise, and a Viking whose legend, much like the lands he named, was larger than life. As our story unfolds, we'll see how Erik's bold moves set the stage for even greater adventures, involving his descendants and their unexpected journeys to yet another new world. Erik's tale doesn't just stop at the icy shores of Greenland. It's a saga that's as much about survival as it is about reinvention. So, let's rewind a bit and delve into the nitty-gritty of why Erik found himself booted from Iceland in the first place. We're talking about a man who turned neighbourly disputes into an art form, but his masterpiece was undoubtedly the one that got him exiled. If you thought getting worked up over a set of chairs was petty, buckle up for the next chapter of Erik's rocky relationships. The straw that broke the Vikings' back came from a series of escalating squabbles that could rival a modern-day reality TV show. Erik's temper, a fiery match to his crimson locks, sparked more than just heated words. It led to a few unfortunate deaths, and in Viking society, that was a one-way ticket to exile. In the Grand Assembly of Iceland, known as the Althing, Erik's fate was sealed with a decree of 3 years of outlawry. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was a full-blown eviction notice from the entire country. But let's pause to consider the economics of Viking justice. Being declared an outlaw wasn't just a social setback, it was a financial blow. You see, Erik couldn't just pack up and leave on foot. No, sir. He needed a longship, the Viking equivalent of a U-Haul, but with oars and sails. Crafting a longship was no small feat, both in labour and cost. These sleek vessels, essential for any respectable Norse expedition, could stretch over 75 feet long and required thousands of man-hours to build. The price tag? Somewhere around the cost of a few dozen cows, which, in Viking terms, was a small fortune. Not a sum you'd find between the sofa cushions, even if you were the proud owner of the finest set of chairs in Iceland. Then there's the logistics of the journey itself. A trek from Iceland to Greenland isn't exactly a sunny Mediterranean cruise. We're talking about a distance of roughly 1,500 miles across some of the most treacherous waters on the planet. Erik had to navigate the North Atlantic's notorious tempests with nothing more than a wooden boat and the stars. Forget Wi-Fi and GPS, this was pure grit and determination with a side of luck. Even with a sturdy longship, the journey was perilous. The cold could freeze a man solid, and a single miscalculation in navigation could send the whole venture spiraling into oblivion. Now, about that little piece of marketing genius naming a frozen wasteland Greenland. Erik wasn't just a brawler, he was a strategist. He knew that selling a new settlement wouldn't be easy, especially when the product was more ice than Eden. But Erik was a man who understood the power of perception. By dubbing the place Greenland, he wasn't just pulling a fast one, he was crafting a narrative. It was a classic case of strategic branding, a move that would make any modern marketer nod in appreciation. Erik banked on the allure of the name to draw settlers, and it worked. Because let's face it, come to Greenland, where the winters are long and the summers are, well, less cold, wouldn't have had quite the same ring to it. But why did people buy into the snowy paradise? Well, there was an economic method to Erik's madness. Iceland in the late 10th century was getting crowded. Land was becoming scarce, and with scarce land came increased tension and disputes, something Erik was all too familiar with. By offering a new frontier, Erik was not only solving his own problem, but providing an outlet for others who were feeling the squeeze. Greenland represented a chance to start anew, to claim land and status that were becoming out of reach back home. Erik's pitch worked like a Norse charm. When he returned to Iceland, the tales of this supposedly verdant land were enough to convince a fleet's worth of settlers to take the plunge. They packed up their lives, their families, and their livestock, climbing aboard longships for the perilous journey to the New World. It was a gamble, sure, but for many it was a risk worth taking. The promise of land, freedom, and a fresh start was a heady mix, enough to lure even the most skeptical of Vikings. And so Erik's legend grew, not just as a saga of exploration, but as a testament to the power of reinvention. He was a man who turned exile into opportunity and icy wilderness into a beacon of hope. Yet, beneath the romance of the tale lies the stark reality of survival in a harsh, unforgiving world. Erik's story is a reminder that history is as much about the myths we create as it is about the truths we uncover. As we continue this journey, we'll see how Erik's legacy paved the way for further adventures, revealing both the glory and the grit of the Viking Age. Erik's legend was set in icy motion as he led his fleet into the daunting unknown, each longship crammed with hopeful settlers and enough salted fish to make a modern nutritionist weep. But these voyagers weren't just chasing dreams. They were fleeing the very real pressures of overcrowded Iceland. Land scarcity had turned their homeland into a hotbed of tension, and Erik's Greenland offered a tempting escape, like a new frontier where they could carve out their own destinies, if not their farmsteads. Upon arrival, reality hit harder than a North Atlantic squall. Greenland was a place where the term green was more a suggestion than a guarantee. The settlers quickly discovered that farming on this frosty rock was less about tilling lush fields and more about coaxing crops from stubborn, rocky soil. With a growing season that wouldn't look out of place on a calendar for the North Pole, these new farmers had all the time in the world to ponder their life choices while staring at patches of earth that seemed allergic to greenery. But let's talk about the economic side of setting up shop in this icy land. Building a sustainable community in Greenland was no small feat. The costs were as steep as the fjords themselves. Resources had to be meticulously managed, from timber for building homes and ships to iron for tools and weapons. These weren't just supplies, they were lifelines. And with trading routes as unpredictable as the weather, a single shipwreck could spell disaster for the entire settlement. Yet the Vikings proved resourceful, if a bit stubborn. They adapted their farming techniques, growing hardy crops like barley and raising livestock that could withstand the chill, cattle, sheep, and goats that roamed the sparse pastures. But let's not romanticize it. This was eking out a living at its most grueling. The settlers had to learn to fish through ice, hunt seals, and trade with the native Inuit for survival tips and resources. This wasn't the pastoral paradise Erik had painted. It was more like an ongoing episode of Survivor, Viking edition. Community bonds became their greatest asset, more precious than any morsel of land. In a place where isolation wasn't just a state of mind, but a geographic certainty, the settlers relied heavily on each other. They formed tight-knit communities where disputes were settled through the Althing, echoing the legal traditions they brought from Iceland. This wasn't just about maintaining order, it was about ensuring survival. A well-run society was an efficient one, and efficiency meant the difference between life and frostbite. But here's the kicker. Despite the hardships, there was a peculiar allure to this rugged existence. The myth of the fearless, independent Viking is seductive, but the truth was much more communal. These settlers weren't lone wolves. They were more like a pack of determined sled dogs pulling together to face the harsh realities of their environment. In truth, their success hinged less on individual bravery and more on collective tenacity. While Erik's marketing ploy had lured them here, it was their unwavering bonds that kept them afloat. The romantic image of Vikings as solitary seafarers conquering the seas with nothing but a sword and a snarl crumbles under the weight of historical reality. In Greenland, their strength was measured not in individual prowess, but in the ability to come together, to work as one against the ever-present threat of nature itself. Greenland was a proving ground, not just for their farming skills, but for their social dynamics. The settlers had to adapt their social structures to the demands of their new world. Leadership was crucial, with chieftains guiding their communities through the myriad challenges of daily life, from food shortages to conflicts with the Inuit. This wasn't the stuff of legend, it was the harsh arithmetic of survival. In many ways, the real story of Erik the Red and his Greenland colony is less about the man himself and more about the community he fostered. An early example of how societies adapt to new environments through cooperation and shared resilience. This is where the mythos of the fearless Viking meets its match in the form of hard, unyielding reality. Erik's settlers were not just adventurers, they were pioneers of survival, their story a testament to human ingenuity and the power of collective effort. They took a land of ice and rock and made it their own, not through brute force, but through an enduring spirit of community. And while Erik may have been the face of this new world, it was the settlers who formed its heart and soul, binding their fate to the frozen soil beneath their feet. As the settlers of Greenland huddled together against the relentless cold, Erik the Red's legacy began to stretch beyond the icy shoals, carried forward by his son, Leif Erikson. If Erik was the marketer who sold the frozen tundra as paradise, Leif was the explorer who took the family business of adventure to new, uncharted territories. We're talking about a guy who, in a twist of fate that only history could pull off, became one of the first Europeans to set foot on North American soil centuries before Columbus even thought about crossing the Atlantic. Leif Erikson was born in Iceland around 970 AD into a world where adventure was as much in the water as the salt. Growing up as Erik the Red's son meant a life filled with stories of distant lands and daring voyages. By the time he reached his 20s, Leif had caught the exploration bug, and let's be honest, there weren't any antibiotics for that in the Viking Age. His curiosity was piqued by tales of lands west of Greenland, whispered by wandering sailors who claimed to have glimpsed new shores beyond the horizon. But Leif wasn't just driven by wanderlust. Scandinavian politics at the time were as turbulent as the North Atlantic. The Norse world was undergoing a seismic shift, with the spread of Christianity challenging the old pagan ways. Conversion wasn't just a matter of faith. It was a political chess game. Kings and chieftains saw the new religion as a means to consolidate power, forge alliances, and bring a semblance of unity to the fractious Norse territories. Leif Erikson, ever the opportunist, saw the winds of change and set his sails accordingly. Around the year 999 AD, Leif travelled to Norway, where King Olaf I Tryggvason ruled with the kind of authority that would make even the toughest Viking chieftains quiver in their sealskin boots. Olaf was a fervent Christian, on a mission to convert the Norse lands one pagan at a time. Leif's journey to Norway wasn't just a sightseeing trip, it was a strategic move. He not only embraced Christianity, but also got baptized, gaining favor with the king. This wasn't just a spiritual awakening, it was smart politics. Being in the king's good graces was like securing a VIP pass in the medieval power circuit. Now, back to those tales of new lands. Leif Erikson, filled with the zeal of a recent convert and the ambition of a true Erikson, set off from Greenland around the year 1000 AD. His destination? The mysterious lands to the west, rumoured to be rich and untamed. With a crew of about 35 men, Leif embarked on a journey that would etch his name into the annals of exploration. Leif's voyage wasn't a blind leap into the unknown, it was a calculated expedition. Navigating the wild waters of the North Atlantic, he first landed in a place he called Helluland, believed to be modern-day Baffin Island in Canada. But Helluland, with its barren rocky shores, was about as inviting as a polar bear's den, so Leif and his crew quickly moved on. Their next stop, Markland, likely Labrador, Canada, offered dense forests and more promise, but it still wasn't the paradise Leif was searching for. Finally, Leif's journey brought him to what he named Vinland, a land described as rich with grapes and fertile soil. Historians believe Vinland was located in what is now Newfoundland, Canada. Here, the Norsemen found a land more forgiving than the icy grip of Greenland, with natural resources that must have seemed like a gift from the gods. For a people used to scraping a living from frostbitten ground, Vinland's lush landscapes were nothing short of miraculous. Yet, the reality of establishing a permanent settlement was another story. Leif's Vinland adventure was more reconnaissance mission than colonization. The Norsemen set up a temporary camp, built a few structures, and explored the land, but they didn't stay long. The reasons for this retreat are as murky as the North Atlantic fog. Some say it was the harsh winters. Others blame clashes with the indigenous peoples, whom the Norse referred to as Skrælings. Here's where the myth of the fearless Viking sails into murky waters. The romantic image of Vikings as unstoppable conquerors crumbles when faced with the logistical realities of sustaining a settlement so far from home. Supply lines were stretched thin, and the Norsemen found themselves in a land where they were the outsiders, a small group amid larger, established indigenous populations. This wasn't the stuff of legendary conquest. It was a tentative step into a vast and unfamiliar world. Despite the lack of permanent settlement, Leif Eriksson's voyage to Vinland marked a significant chapter in the Viking saga. It was a testament to the Norse spirit of exploration and adaptability. The stories of Vinland, passed down through generations, fueled further expeditions and cemented Leif's place as a pioneer in the annals of history. His journey underscored the Viking ability to adapt and survive, even in the face of daunting odds and unfamiliar territories. The tale of Leif's voyage is also a reminder of the interconnectedness of political ambition and exploration. The spread of Christianity, the pursuit of new lands, and the consolidation of power were all threads woven into the fabric of Norse society. The Vikings weren't just raiders with horned helmets, which, by the way, is another myth. Those helmets were as fictional as a unicorn's horn. They were traders, settlers, and navigators of the political tides, as much as the ocean waves. Leif Eriksson's legacy is emblematic of the Viking Age, a time when the world seemed to shrink as adventurous souls pushed the boundaries of the known world. His journey to Vinland may have been brief, but its impact rippled through history, challenging the narrative of European exploration and expanding our understanding of the Viking world. In the end, Leif's tale is one of curiosity, adaptation, and the relentless drive to explore, even when the outcome is as uncertain as the North Atlantic weather. As we chart the course of Viking exploration, we see the interplay of politics, religion, and the human spirit's unyielding quest for new horizons. Leif Eriksson's journey is but one chapter in a saga that continues to unfold, revealing the complexities and contradictions of a people who dared to dream beyond the edge of the map. With each voyage, the Norse expanded their world and reshaped their place in it, leaving a legacy that echoes through the ages like the call of a far-off horn, beckoning us to discover what lies beyond the next horizon. So, Erik the Red and his son Leif weren't just figures in a dusty Norse saga, they were real-world influences long before Instagram made that a career. Their tales, though steeped in myth and legend, raise an eyebrow or two when you dig into the reality of their exploits. Let's be honest, Erik's knack for painting Greenland as a Nordic paradise was a marketing ploy that would make Don Draper proud. But what about the impact of these legendary voyages on the broader canvas of European exploration narratives? Grab your metaphorical longship, because we're about to set sail on a journey through history's more nuanced waters. First, let's debunk a myth that's as popular as it is persistent, the idea that Erik and Leif were just marauding Vikings without a care for anything but conquest and plunder. True, the Viking reputation for being the rock stars of the medieval world, loud, wild, and occasionally destructive, has been romanticized to the hilt. But in reality, their expeditions were driven by a mix of economic necessity, social pressures, and yes, the tantalizing allure of the unknown. They were as much traders and settlers as they were warriors. The Norse weren't just raiding, they were networking, in a way that LinkedIn could only dream of. The significance of Erik's and Leif's journeys lies in their role as precursors to later European explorations. While Columbus gets the credit for discovering America in 1492, Leif Erikson was there nearly 5 centuries earlier, around the year 1000 AD. Yet, the Norse didn't stick around long enough to lay claim to the New World in the same way Columbus did. Why? Because the Norse expeditions were like the medieval version of a pop-up shop, temporary, exploratory, and not intended for long-term settlement. They lacked the manpower and resources to establish a permanent foothold, and the harsh realities of maintaining supply lines over such vast distances proved insurmountable. But let's not pretend that the Vikings were simply victims of circumstance. Their brief foray into North America was as much about testing the waters, quite literally, as it was about claiming new lands. They were explorers in the truest sense, driven by a curiosity that was both their strength and their Achilles' heel. The Norse voyages remind us that exploration isn't just about planting flags, it's about understanding the limits of one's reach and the realities of survival in a foreign land. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find that the narrative of exploration had shifted dramatically. By the time the Age of Discovery rolled around, European nations had the political stability and technological advancements to support long-term colonization efforts. The Norse had the spirit, but lacked the infrastructure and centralized governance that would later enable countries like Spain and Portugal to embark on their global expansion. They were like the opening act that set the stage for the main event, hinting at a world beyond the horizon but leaving it to others to write the next chapters. Yet, the allure of Viking history remains as captivating today as it was 1,000 years ago. What is it about these seafaring Norsemen that continues to captivate our imaginations? For one, their stories are a cocktail of adventure and audacity, sprinkled with a dash of the supernatural. Who doesn't love a good yarn about fearless warriors braving the icy seas, guided by nothing but the stars and their own indomitable will? It's the kind of tale that resonates with our innate desire for exploration and discovery. Moreover, the Vikings offer a mirror to our modern world, reflecting both the best and worst of human nature. Their adaptability and resilience in the face of adversity are lessons in resourcefulness that still hold relevance today. At the same time, their violent tendencies and internal conflicts remind us of the darker aspects of our nature. The Norse were not just adventurers. They were complex characters navigating a world as unpredictable as the seas they sailed. In examining Erik the Red and his legacy, we find a story that is as much about survival and reinvention as it is about conquest. His ability to turn a sentence of exile into an opportunity for exploration speaks volumes about the human spirit's capacity to adapt and thrive under pressure. And while Erik may have been the face of the Greenland settlement, it was the collective effort of the Norse community that ensured its survival. So, as we wrap up our voyage through the annals of Viking history, let's take a moment to appreciate the real lessons these ancient explorers offer. They remind us that the journey is as important as the destination, that myths can inspire as much as they obscure, and that the past is a mosaic of both fact and fiction. In a world that often feels as chaotic and unpredictable as the North Atlantic, the Vikings' legacy encourages us to embrace the unknown with courage and curiosity. Because at the end of the day, whether you're navigating uncharted waters or scrolling through endless feeds, it's the stories we tell and the challenges we face that define us. In the grand theatre of ancient history, the Etruscans are like that enigmatic character who waltzes in, steals the scene, and exits leaving everyone asking, "Who was that?" These folks weren't just your run-of-the-mill ancient civilization, they were the original masters of the dramatic entrance and the mysterious exit. Originating from an obscure background that has baffled historians more than an unsolvable crossword puzzle, the Etruscans reached their zenith around the 6th century BCE, just in time to dazzle their neighbours and future historians alike. Let's start with the basics. The Etruscans occupied what is now modern-day Tuscany, and if you're thinking wine and rolling hills, you're spot on. But back in their heyday, they were less about vineyards and more about trade routes, iron, and some seriously snazzy political systems. At their peak, the Etruscan League, a coalition of 12 cities, was the toast of the Mediterranean. These cities weren't just random dots on a map. They were thriving hubs of commerce and culture, connected by a network of trade routes that would make a modern-day logistics manager weep with joy. Now, here's where things get a little spicy. Unlike their more famous neighbours, the Romans, who documented everything from their dinner menus to their military conquests, the Etruscans left behind a tantalizingly scant amount of written records. It's almost as if they wanted to keep us guessing. Most of what we know comes from their burial sites, which are as elaborate as they are informative. We're talking tombs that make your home look like a broom closet, complete with frescoes, sculptures, and a treasure trove of artifacts that scream, "We were here, and we were fabulous." But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. There's a myth that's floated around like an unwelcome party guest, that the Etruscans were some kind of mystical people, descended from exotic lands, maybe even aliens if you're feeling particularly conspiratorial. The truth is, they were probably a mix of indigenous Italic peoples and immigrants from the eastern Mediterranean. A genetic study, the kind that makes genealogists giddy, has suggested ties to the Near East, but there's nothing supernatural about it. Sorry, Ancient Aliens fans, you'll have to get your kicks elsewhere. Now, while we're on the topic of debunking, let's talk politics. The Etruscans had a knack for governance that was almost theatrical. Each city was an independent state, yet they formed the aforementioned league, a sort of ancient UN sans the bickering about climate change. They were ruled by kings who were more like elected officials than hereditary monarchs. And here's a juicy tidbit. These leaders were often chosen based on merit and charisma rather than just bloodlines. Imagine that, a political system where talent mattered, if only that were as common today. The Etruscan economy was no less impressive. They were master metalworkers, and their iron and bronze goods were hot commodities on the international market. They traded with the Greeks, the Phoenicians, and even the Egyptians, swapping goods like a well-oiled flea market. And let's not forget their artistry. Etruscan pottery and jewellery were the ancient equivalent of haute couture, coveted by those in the know and imitated by everyone else. But beyond trade and politics, what really set the Etruscans apart was their flair for the dramatic. Their society was steeped in rituals and ceremonies that would put a Broadway production to shame. From elaborate religious rites to spectacular public events, they knew how to put on a show. And while the Romans might have borrowed some of their customs, they could never quite capture that Etruscan panache. As we delve deeper into the Etruscan world, it's crucial to keep in mind the broader context of their existence. They weren't isolated, they were part of a vibrant tapestry of Mediterranean cultures. Their interactions with other civilizations were not just a matter of trade or warfare, but a complex web of influences that shaped their art, religion, and daily life. This cross-pollination of cultures was a defining feature of the ancient world, and the Etruscans were right in the thick of it. So, as we continue our exploration of this fascinating people, remember that the allure of the Etruscans lies not just in what they left behind, but in the tantalizing gaps and unanswered questions they present. Their legacy is a reminder that history is not just a chronicle of events, but a narrative shaped by those who lived it and those who study it. And as we peel back the layers of Etruscan life, we find a story that is as captivating as it is complex, a tale of a people who, for a time, were the stars of their own show on the stage of history. As we venture further into the Etruscan realm, let's crack open the dusty vaults of their afterlife beliefs, a topic that makes life insurance policies look like a toddler's bedtime story. The Etruscans, much like their Egyptian contemporaries, held the conviction that death was merely a change of scenery, not the final curtain call. This belief wasn't just some casual footnote in their cultural playbook, it was the main act that influenced everything from architecture to art. Picture this. The Etruscan tombs, or as I like to call them, the ancient Airbnbs for the afterlife. These weren't your run-of-the-mill resting places. Oh no, these were subterranean palaces that could give modern real estate moguls a run for their money. Crafted to mimic the comforts of home, these tombs were decked out with every luxury imaginable, an ancient version of Pimp My Crypt. Archaeologists have unearthed tombs that stretch across 300 square meters. Yes, you heard me right. That's roughly the size of 4 New York City apartments. Talk about an eternal timeshare. Now, the Etruscans didn't just toss a few trinkets into these lavish abodes and call it a day. Oh no, they ensured the dead were well equipped for their journey to the afterlife, including items like chairs, tables, and even full sets of dinnerware. It's as if they anticipated the afterlife being one long dinner party, where running out of cutlery would be a social faux pas. These tombs were adorned with vibrant frescoes depicting everything from banquets to sporting events, ensuring that the deceased had ample entertainment. Clearly, the Etruscans believed in living, or rather, dying in style. But let's not get too carried away by the opulence without addressing the elephant in the room, or should I say, the elephantine cost. Constructing these tombs was no small feat. It required a labour force equipped with skills that could rival today's top architects and artisans. The investment in these eternal homes was a testament to the Etruscans' belief in the significance of the afterlife, an investment that would likely bankrupt today's middle class. And while a modern funeral can set you back a tidy sum, an Etruscan send-off could cost the equivalent of a small fortune, a staggering reminder of the economic power wielded by Etruscan elites. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Despite the lavishness, Etruscan funerals weren't just about flaunting wealth, they were a vital cultural practice steeped in religious significance. The Etruscans believed in a complex pantheon of gods and goddesses, with a particular emphasis on deities associated with the underworld. Their religious ceremonies were as much about appeasing these gods as they were about honouring the deceased. This blend of religious and social elements made funerals grand public affairs, akin to the Oscars of the ancient world, where everyone wanted a front row seat. The Etruscans also had a peculiar obsession with fate, or fatum as they called it. They believed that one's destiny was preordained, and their meticulous funeral rituals were a way to ensure that fate was fulfilled. This belief in destiny extended beyond the grave, with intricate rituals to guide the soul to its predetermined place in the afterlife. It's like they had their very own celestial GPS guiding them to eternal bliss, or at least that was the hope. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality was that these elaborate funerals were primarily reserved for the elite. Commoners didn't get the full-service tomb experience. Instead, they were often buried in simpler graves with fewer trappings and considerably less pomp. It's a stark reminder that even in death, social stratification was alive and well. The Etruscans, it seems, were realists to the end. And while we're on the subject of myths, let's tackle the notion that Etruscan tombs were just dusty relics waiting to be discovered. In truth, these tombs have faced more looters than a clearance sale at a department store. Treasure hunters have been plundering Etruscan graves for centuries, long before archaeologists arrived on the scene with their brushes and notebooks. This looting has resulted in a significant loss of artifacts and information, leaving historians with tantalizing gaps in the Etruscan puzzle. So, as we continue our journey into the Etruscan afterlife, it's essential to remember that these tombs are more than just ancient architectural marvels. They are windows into a society that placed immense value on the continuity of life beyond death. The Etruscans' beliefs about the afterlife were not just theological musings, they were a driving force behind some of the most breathtaking artistic and architectural achievements of their time. These beliefs shaped their world and continue to intrigue us today, inviting us to ponder the mysteries of existence and the legacy we leave behind. In the next chapter of our exploration, we'll delve deeper into the intricate rituals and ceremonies that accompanied Etruscan funerals. From the sacred to the scandalous, there's much more to uncover about this fascinating civilization that refused to be forgotten. Stay tuned as we unravel more of the Etruscan enigma, one tomb at a time. All right, folks, let's dive headfirst into the wonderfully weird world of Etruscan funerals. If you've ever thought of funerals as somber affairs filled with hushed tones and uncomfortable suits, well, brace yourself. The Etruscans had a knack for turning even the most sacred rituals into a blend of the solemn and the spectacular. It's like they were determined to throw a final party that would make even the most extravagant weddings look like a Tuesday night dinner special. First up, let's talk about professional mourners. Yes, you heard that right, people actually got paid to wail and sob, turning the art of grieving into a full-blown performance. These mourners were like the original Oscar contenders, delivering emotional monologues that would rival any Hollywood tearjerker. Their job was to ensure that the deceased's passage to the afterlife was accompanied by an appropriate level of drama, complete with all the tears and lamentations you could muster. When you think about it, they were the ancient equivalent of rock stars, touring the funeral circuit with their own brand of emotional hits. And then there were the banquets. The Etruscans believed that a proper send-off required a feast fit for royalty, and nothing less would do. Imagine tables groaning under the weight of roasted meats, fresh breads, and an endless supply of wine. These banquets weren't just about stuffing your face, though that was certainly a bonus. They were a way to honor the dead, celebrate their life, and keep their memory alive. It's as if the Etruscans were saying, "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we journey to the afterlife." Now, if you thought things couldn't get more colorful, hold on to your togas. We've still got gladiatorial games to discuss. That's right, these folks decided that the best way to honor the deceased was by staging a good old-fashioned blood sport. Picture it, warriors clashing in combat, swords clanging, and the crowd roaring. It was like the Super Bowl of ancient funerals, a high-stakes event that would make even the most jaded sports fans sit up and take notice. But these games weren't just about entertainment. They were an offering to the gods, a way to ensure that the deceased had a smooth transition to the afterlife. Think of it as a celestial insurance policy, complete with a hefty premium paid in blood. Now, let's talk economics, because someone had to foot the bill for all this pageantry. Spoiler alert, it wasn't the common folk. The elite families, with their deep pockets and desire to flaunt their status, were the ones bankrolling these extravagant affairs. These funerals were a chance to show off wealth and power, a final hurrah that said, "Look at me, even in death, I'm a big deal." The costs could be astronomical, with estimates suggesting that a single lavish funeral might have cost up to a year's worth of a labourer's wages. It's a stark reminder that, even in matters of life and death, money talks, and it talks loudly. But here's where the story takes a twist. While the elite were splurging on funerals that could rival a royal wedding, the economic impact trickled down to the rest of society. These grand events created jobs, from craftsmen and cooks to musicians and mourners. It was a veritable industry that kept the wheels of the local economy turning. So, in a way, the death of an elite Etruscan was a boon for the living, providing employment and a sense of community involvement. It's the ultimate irony. One person's final farewell fueling another's livelihood. Now, let's address a myth that floats around like a ghost at a séance. The idea that these extravagant funerals were purely about religious devotion. While the Etruscans were undoubtedly spiritual, these events were as much about social prestige as they were about piety. A big send-off wasn't just an offering to the gods, it was a statement of power and influence, a way to cement one's place in the social hierarchy, even in the great beyond. But before we get too cynical, let's acknowledge the charm of it all. There's something inherently human about wanting to celebrate a life well lived, to ensure that the person's legacy endures. The Etruscans, with their flair for the dramatic, understood this deeply. Their funerals were a reflection of their society, rich, vibrant, and unafraid to embrace both life and death with gusto. So, as we continue to unravel the mysteries of Etruscan funerals, remember that these rituals were more than just elaborate spectacles. They were a testament to a civilization that understood the power of tradition, the importance of community, and the inevitability of fate. The Etruscans left behind a legacy that continues to captivate us, a reminder that while the details may change, the fundamental human desire to honor the past remains the same. Stay with us as we press on, delving further into the complexities of Etruscan life and death, uncovering the stories that these ancient people left behind. There's more to discover, more myths to debunk, and more truths to reveal. The Etruscan enigma continues, and we're not done exploring yet. And speaking of enigmas, let's dive into how the Romans and Greeks painted the Etruscans as the ancient world's version of the Kardashians, known for their extravagant funerals and alleged excesses. But how much of this reputation is fact, and how much is ancient tabloid fodder? First, let's address the Romans. Boy, did they love a good story, especially one that painted their rivals in a less than flattering light. The Etruscans were often depicted as the ultimate party animals, with funerals so lavish they made Roman banquets look like a child's birthday party. Roman historian Livy didn't hold back, describing Etruscan banquets as grandiose affairs filled with opulence and indulgence. But here's the kicker. Livy was writing during a time when Rome needed to justify its dominance. What better way to do that than by portraying the Etruscans as indulgent and morally decadent, thereby legitimizing Roman conquest as a form of cultural correction? Let's compare this with some hard evidence, shall we? Archaeological digs don't lie, unless you count the occasional mix-up with an ostrich skeleton. The tombs unearthed in places like Tarquinia and Cerveteri are indeed impressive, but they aren't bursting with the sheer excess that Roman writers claimed. Sure, there are frescoes and artifacts aplenty, but they tell a story of spirituality and respect for the deceased more than they do of decadent feasting. It's like taking a snapshot of a Michelin star restaurant and labelling it a fast food joint. There's nuance that's lost in translation. Now, the Greeks had their own take on the Etruscans, often portraying them as the mysterious other. Herodotus, the father of history, or perhaps the grandfather of gossip, suggested the Etruscans descended from the Lydians, a people from Asia Minor known for their wealth. This exotic origin story added an air of mystery and luxury to the Etruscan image, painting them as wealthy outsiders with peculiar customs. But here's the twist. Genetic studies show that while there might be some Eastern Mediterranean influence, the Etruscans were largely indigenous to Italy. So much for the exotic allure. Sometimes the truth is closer to home than we'd like to admit. Let's not forget the role of economic jealousy in these narratives. The Etruscans were wealthy, no doubt about it. Their control of trade routes and metal resources made them the Bill Gates of the ancient world, and envy is a powerful motivator. When you're competing for economic dominance, painting your rivals as over-the-top spendthrifts isn't just convenient, it's strategic. Yet, while the Romans were busy scribbling their exaggerated tales, they were also busy borrowing Etruscan customs left and right. Irony much? Gladiatorial games, for example, likely have their roots in Etruscan funerary practices. The Romans took these traditions, added a few lines and columns, and voila! A cultural phenomenon was born. It's like criticizing someone's fashion sense while secretly raiding their closet. Now, let's talk numbers, because who doesn't love a good data point? Estimates suggest that Etruscan funerals could cost up to a year's salary for a labourer, which sounds steep until you consider the Roman penchant for similar displays of wealth. Roman funerals, especially for the elite, could be just as extravagant, if not more. So, calling the Etruscans out for their spending is a bit like the pot calling the kettle black, or in this case, gold-plated. This brings us to another myth, the idea that these lavish funerals were purely wasteful. In reality, they were community events that stimulated the local economy. Craftsmen, musicians, cooks, everyone had a role to play. It was like a mini economic boost wrapped in a toga. While the elite flaunted their wealth, the community reaped the benefits, albeit indirectly. So, why the persistent tales of Etruscan excess? It's simple. Stories stick. Once a narrative takes hold, especially one as juicy as this, it's hard to shake. Just ask any celebrity caught in a rumour mill. The Romans and Greeks understood the power of a good story, and they used it to shape perceptions and justify actions. But let's not entirely dismiss the allure of these myths. There's a certain romance in imagining a society where life and death are celebrated with equal gusto, where funerals are not just about mourning but about living large. It speaks to a universal human desire to be remembered, to leave a mark. Yet, as we peel back these layers of myth and reality, one thing becomes clear. The Etruscans were more than the sum of their funerals. They were a sophisticated, multifaceted society that left a lasting impact, even if history has sometimes tried to write them off as mere footnotes. So, as we continue our journey into the world of the Etruscans, let's keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep challenging the narratives that have been handed down through the ages. There's more to uncover, more stories to tell, and more truths to reveal. The Etruscan enigma continues to intrigue, and we're not done yet. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the mysteries of this fascinating civilization, one myth at a time. So, as we dig deeper into the Etruscan legacy, let's pause for a moment and reflect on their lasting influence, especially when it comes to the Romans, who were like overzealous interns that took detailed notes and then decided to one-up the masters. The Etruscans, with their flair for the dramatic and penchant for opulent send-offs, left an indelible mark on Roman culture, especially in the way they approached funerals. This is one hand-me-down that didn't just sit at the back of the closet but got worn proudly, and often. The Romans, ever the magpies of culture, borrowed heavily from Etruscan customs. They took the Etruscan penchant for grand funerals and turned it into a cornerstone of their own societal rituals. Gladiatorial games, for instance, those blood-soaked spectacles that became synonymous with Roman public life, were inspired by Etruscan funerary rites. The Etruscans saw these games as a way to honour the dead and appease the gods. The Romans, in their typical go big or go home style, expanded these into massive public events, transforming them from an occasional tribute into a regular form of entertainment. It's like taking a quaint backyard barbecue and turning it into a nationwide cook-off. But it wasn't just the games that they inherited. The Romans also adopted the Etruscan belief in the importance of the afterlife. They built elaborate mausoleums and continued the tradition of burying the dead with goods, although the scale varied depending on the deceased's social standing. It seems that the Etruscans had taught the Romans one crucial lesson, that a person's status in life should be reflected in their death. This principle was enshrined in Roman culture, where funeral processions became public displays of wealth and power, a chance to cement one's legacy among the living. And let's not forget the pompa, the grand funeral procession that was as much about public display as it was about mourning. This was another Etruscan innovation that found fertile ground in Roman society. Picture a parade through the streets, complete with musicians, professional mourners, yes, those Oscar-worthy performers, and the deceased's ancestors paraded as masks. It was a spectacle that turned the streets into theatre, where life and death took centre stage, and the audience, well, they were all part of the show. Now, while we're on the subject of legacies, let's bring this full circle to our own modern-day rituals. It's fascinating to wonder what the Etruscans might think if they were to witness today's celebrity funerals and extravagant memorials. Picture them at a Hollywood service, complete with designer urns and A-list eulogies. Would they raise an eyebrow at the expense, or would they nod in understanding, recognizing in it the same human desire for a meaningful send-off that drove their own lavish rituals? Probably the latter, with maybe a hint of envy at the sheer scale of it all. Our fascination with celebrity funerals reveals a truth that the Etruscans would have understood all too well. The public commemoration of life is as much about the living as it is about the deceased. Modern society, much like the ancient world, uses these events to reflect cultural values, express collective grief, and, let's be honest, indulge in a bit of spectacle. Just as the Etruscans once used funerals to assert social status and display wealth, today's celebrity memorials often become media events that highlight not just the individual's life, but the cultural zeitgeist they represented. And let's not overlook the economic angle here. The business of death has always been a lucrative one. From the craftsmen of ancient Etruria to the modern-day funeral industry, the Etruscans would likely have appreciated the economic engine that celebrity funerals have become, creating jobs and generating revenue just as their own elaborate rituals did millennia ago. It seems that, in some ways, we've taken a page from their book, turning the send-off into a community affair that supports livelihoods and brings people together, albeit with a bit more paparazzi. In pondering the Etruscan legacy, we see a civilization that understood the importance of ritual, the power of spectacle, and the human need for connection beyond the grave. Their influence on Roman customs is a testament to their cultural sophistication, a reminder that the past is always present, lurking in the traditions we continue to observe, even as we put our own modern spin on them. So, as we wrap up our journey through the enigmatic world of the Etruscans, let's raise a metaphorical glass to these ancient innovators. They may have faded from the stage of history, but their impact endures, woven into the very fabric of the societies that followed. In their grand tombs and elaborate funerals, they left us a legacy of life and death that continues to captivate and inspire. And in doing so, they remind us that while the sands of time may shift, the human desire to honor the past and celebrate life in all its complexity remains unchanged. Here's to the Etruscans, the original masters of the dramatic exit, whose echoes still resonate in our world today. 17th century England was a bit like a soap opera on an over-caffeinated bend of political betrayals, civil wars, and enough plot twists to make your head spin faster than a royal decapitation. Enter John Locke, a man who was supposed to be a doctor but decided that saving lives wasn't thrilling enough. Instead, he went on to crack open the dusty vault of human thought and give it a good airing out. Locke was born in 1632, right smack in the middle of England's identity crisis. Picture a country doing existential yoga, trying to balance on the wobbly foothold of monarchy, parliament, and a very confused populace. The English Civil War was the main event, a clash between the king's supporters, the royalists, and the parliamentarians, who had finally decided they were tired of the king's shenanigans. Spoiler alert, the king, Charles I, lost his head, literally in 1649. Locke, growing up in this chaotic theatre, saw the scripts of power and authority being rewritten. His future political theories would reflect this drama, but for now, young John was just a lad with a curious mind and a knack for avoiding the plague, which was quite the achievement back then. In 1642, as Charles I and Parliament were gearing up for their first battle, Locke was probably more concerned with his Latin conjugations than civil war strategies. Fast forward to the Restoration in 1660, when England decided to put the monarchy back on its feet with Charles II. This was after a brief experiment with republicanism that went about as well as a lead balloon. The king was back, and so were the parties. But amidst this revelry, Locke was hitting the books at Oxford, where he initially dabbled in medicine. However, the call of philosophy was louder than any medical lecture, and Locke couldn't resist. After all, why cure a headache when you could ponder the nature of the universe? Locke's big break came not from medicine, but from a fortuitous encounter with Anthony Ashley Cooper, the first Earl of Shaftesbury, who, let's face it, had a name that sounded like he collected musty old tomes and poodles with fancy haircuts. Cooper was a political dynamo, and under his wing, Locke was thrust into the churning waters of political philosophy. This was around the time England was getting into the habit of overthrowing, or at least seriously inconveniencing, its monarchs. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 was the tipping point, a bloodless coup that sent James II packing and ushered in William and Mary. It was like changing the lead actors without a rehearsal, and Locke had a front row seat. This revolution was Locke's eureka moment. It confirmed his belief that government should serve the people, not the other way around. His writings, particularly the 2 treatises of government, were like a philosophical blockbuster, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, people had natural rights that no crown could trample on. Locke's ideas were as radical as a cat walking on its hind legs and reciting Shakespeare. He challenged the divine right of kings, which was essentially the notion that monarchs were God's VIPs on earth. Instead, Locke argued that power should come from the consent of the governed. This was revolutionary stuff, like suggesting to a room of cats that maybe dogs should lead the household. Now, it's tempting to think of Locke as a lone genius scribbling away in a candlelit room. But his life was far from solitary. He was part of an intellectual clique, the kind that would make today's book clubs seem like casual chit-chat. The Royal Society, an assembly of curious minds, was Locke's playground. These were the folks who preferred dissecting frogs over discussing the latest fashion trends, and they were instrumental in shaping Locke's thoughts. But let's not get too caught up in the romance of intellectual salons. The 17th century was still a time when scientific innovation could land you in hot water, sometimes literally. Locke and his contemporaries were always a few steps away from being accused of heresy, witchcraft, or worse, bad manners at court. Locke's life was a testament to finding clarity in chaos. He navigated the political upheavals like a seasoned sailor, with a compass pointing towards reason and evidence. And while his contributions to philosophy were monumental, he never lost his grounding in the practicalities of life. He understood the importance of balance, much like knowing when to put down the philosophy book and pick up a good glass of wine. In the end, John Locke was the kind of thinker who could turn the anarchy of his times into a coherent philosophy for the ages. He took the tumultuous events of his life and distilled them into ideas that would echo through history. His thoughts on liberty, government, and human understanding were like a lighthouse guiding the weary ship of state through the fog of uncertainty. So, while 17th century England might have been a hotbed of unpredictability, it was also the perfect backdrop for a mind like Locke's. He had the rare ability to see the potential for order amid chaos, to find the thread of logic in a tapestry of madness. And as we continue to grapple with our own brand of modern-day upheavals, Locke's legacy reminds us that sometimes the best way to make sense of the world is to question everything we think we know. Locke's legacy reminds us that sometimes the best way to make sense of the world is to question everything we think we know. Now, let's rewind a bit to the days when Locke wasn't the philosophical heavyweight we know today, but a bright-eyed student navigating the hallowed halls of Oxford University. Spoiler alert, the experience was less enlightening than you might think. Oxford, in the mid-1600s, was more about tradition than innovation, a place where the air was thick with the mustiness of ancient texts and the stifling grip of scholasticism. This was the kind of intellectual environment where Aristotle's ancient musings still held court as the ultimate truth, and questioning them was about as welcome as a cat at a dog show. Locke, however, wasn't one to settle for dusty dogma. He found the lectures as invigorating as a stale loaf of bread and realized early on that Oxford's curriculum was more focused on rote memorization than critical thinking. In 1652, at the tender age of 20, Locke began his studies at Christ Church, the largest and wealthiest of Oxford's colleges. But rather than being swept up in a whirlwind of academic inspiration, he was mostly confronted with a curriculum that hadn't changed much since the Middle Ages. Latin, Greek, and a heavy dose of theology were the main courses on offer, and while Locke was no stranger to these subjects, he craved something more substantial, like a philosophical Big Mac instead of a salad of second-hand ideas. Enter Robert Boyle, a veritable breath of fresh intellectual air. Boyle was a chemist with a penchant for experimentation and one of the founding members of the Royal Society. Meeting him was like discovering a new continent of thought, one where science was a verb, not just a noun. Boyle's work was all about empiricism and experimentation, two ingredients that would become essential in Locke's philosophical recipe. The connection with Boyle wasn't just a casual acquaintance, it was a catalyst that propelled Locke to question the world around him more rigorously than ever before. Locke's association with Boyle and the Royal Society opened his eyes to the revolution happening in scientific thinking. Gone were the days of accepting everything on faith alone. Now was the time for observation, evidence, and a healthy dose of skepticism. This shift was about as radical as trading in a horse-drawn carriage for a shiny new Tesla. Locke began to apply these principles not just to science, but to politics, society, and human understanding. A full-on intellectual makeover. But let's not get carried away thinking Locke was a lone maverick, challenging the establishment at every turn. The 17th century was a time when straying too far from accepted norms could land you in serious trouble. The academic establishment wasn't exactly thrilled with Locke's burgeoning interest in empiricism over tradition. To them, Locke's questioning of age-old truths was akin to poking a sleeping dragon with a very sharp stick. Nevertheless, Locke persisted, forging friendships with other intellectuals who shared his passion for new ideas. Figures like Thomas Sydenham, often called the father of English medicine, influenced Locke's thinking on empirical methods, particularly in medicine. Sydenham's emphasis on observation and experience over theory resonated with Locke, reinforcing the notion that knowledge should be grounded in reality, not just the dusty pages of ancient texts. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Locke's time at Oxford was punctuated with the occasional academic spat, as his ideas often rubbed the establishment the wrong way. But this only served to sharpen his wit and hone his arguments, preparing him for the philosophical battles that lay ahead. He understood the importance of challenging the status quo and wasn't afraid to ruffle a few feathers in the pursuit of truth. Economically, the England of Locke's time was experiencing the early rumblings of what would later be recognized as capitalism. The rise of trade and commerce was shifting power dynamics, and Locke was keenly aware of the implications. His observations on property and economics would later be woven into his political theories, with the notion that property rights were fundamental to individual liberty. It's as though he took a sneak peek at the future and decided to write the manual for it. Despite the intellectual resistance he faced, Locke's years at Oxford were formative. They laid the groundwork for a philosophy that would question not only the nature of government, but the very way we understand and acquire knowledge. Locke's time at university may have been more dusty than dynamic, but it was here that the seeds of his revolutionary ideas were sown. The myth of Locke as an isolated genius, scribbling away in solitude, belies the reality of his interconnected world. He was part of a vibrant network of thinkers, each challenging and inspiring the other. This community was instrumental in shaping Locke's approach to philosophy, which was as much about dialogue and discourse as it was about solitary reflection. So, while Locke might have found more dust than dynamism in the lecture halls of Oxford, he also found the connections and influences that would propel him to philosophical stardom. His early education was less about absorbing information and more about learning how to think critically and question the world around him. It was a lesson that would serve him, and the rest of us, well, in the years to come. As we continue our journey through Locke's life, we'll see how these early experiences at Oxford and his encounters with intellectual heavyweights like Boyle laid the foundation for a philosophy that would challenge the very fabric of society. But for now, let's leave Locke amidst the cobblestones and cloisters of Oxford, a young man on the brink of greatness, ready to shake the world with his ideas. So, as we leave Locke amid the hallowed halls of Oxford, let's fast forward to when his ideas really started shaking up the scene. By the time Locke penned his 2 treatises of government, he was like a philosophical chef serving up a spicy dish that no one had quite tasted before. It was 1689, and Locke was busy upending the divine right of kings, a concept as beloved in monarchical circles as cake is to a birthday party. Now, let's get something straight. The divine right of kings wasn't just a polite suggestion, it was the backbone of every royal's job description. The idea that monarchs were God's chosen CEOs of earth gave them carte blanche to do just about anything, short of changing the weather. But Locke, ever the intellectual rebel, wasn't buying it. He argued that authority should come from the consent of the governed, not some divine appointment. This was about as radical as suggesting your boss needs employee approval to make decisions. Locke's 2 treatises was a direct response to Sir Robert Filmer's Patriarcha, which argued for absolute monarchy. Filmer must have looked at Locke's work and felt like someone had just suggested replacing his morning tea with a cup of vinegar. Locke's treatises, published anonymously at first because, self-preservation, laid out a vision where government was a social contract. If rulers broke that contract, citizens had every right to give them the boot. Revolutionary? You bet. Locke's ideas didn't stop at governance. Fast forward to An Essay Concerning Human Understanding, where Locke decided to take a scalpel to the human mind. Published in 1689, this was Locke's way of saying, let's pop the hood and see what's really going on up there. He proposed that the mind was a blank slate, or tabula rasa, at birth. Picture that, a mind free of any pre-installed apps, waiting for life's experiences to load it up. No divine downloads, no innate ideas, just pure potential. The reception? Mixed, to put it mildly. In a world where most folks thought knowledge was pre-packaged and delivered by the higher powers, Locke was essentially calling for a DIY approach to understanding. Critics, particularly those who believed in innate knowledge, probably felt like someone had switched their favorite opera to a punk rock playlist. But for a burgeoning Enlightenment audience, Locke's ideas were like a breath of fresh air. Finally, a chance to think freely without peering over their shoulders for divine lightning bolts. Economically, Locke was no stranger to the shifting sands of his time. England was experiencing early capitalist stirrings, with trade and property rights becoming the buzzwords of the century. Locke's treatises weren't just abstract musings, they were grounded in these economic realities. He argued that property was a natural right, derived from one's labour. The idea that you owned what you worked for might seem obvious today, but back then it was groundbreaking, like suggesting that the Earth might actually orbit the Sun. Now, let's not romanticize Locke as a lone ranger in a world of cowboys. He was part of a broader intellectual movement, and his ideas didn't exist in a vacuum. His thoughts on government were as influenced by the Glorious Revolution as they were by his own academic pursuits. The Revolution was a bloodless coup that sent King James II packing, and it provided the perfect backdrop for Locke's theories. Here was a tangible example of a ruler losing power because he overstepped his bounds. Locke's social contract in action. But how did these revolutionary ideas fare in a world still clinging to monarchy like a cat to a cosy lap? Well, it was a mixed bag. The intelligentsia loved it, seeing in Locke a champion of reason and rights. Monarchs, and their loyalists, not so much. They probably regarded Locke's writings as the philosophical equivalent of a burr under their saddles. Yet, despite the controversy, or maybe because of it, Locke's ideas spread like wildfire, influencing not just England, but also the American colonies and beyond. Locke's treatises and essays didn't just question the status quo, they provided a roadmap for a new kind of society, one where individuals mattered and governments were accountable. His ideas planted the seeds for modern democracy, even if they didn't quite sprout immediately. Like any good revolutionary, Locke knew that change was a marathon, not a sprint. Let's pause here for a second to appreciate the sheer audacity of Locke's vision. In a world where kings sat on thrones gilded with divine approval, Locke was effectively telling them, "You work for us, buddy." It was a bold move, akin to suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the Earth wasn't the centre of the universe. And yet, despite or perhaps because of the pushback, Locke's ideas endured, shaping the contours of political thought for centuries. So, while Locke was busy scribbling his revolutionary ideas, the world around him was slowly waking up to the possibilities of a society built on reason and rights. His works were more than just ink on paper. They were the blueprints for a new world order. It's no wonder, then, that Locke's name is etched into the annals of history, a testament to the power of ideas to transcend time and transform societies. But let's not tie a neat bow on Locke's story just yet. There's more to explore, more threads to unravel. As we continue this journey through Locke's life and legacy, we'll see how his ideas not only challenged the world he knew, but also laid the groundwork for the world we live in today. So, hold on to your hats or wigs if you're feeling particularly 17th century, because Locke's philosophical adventure is far from over. There's still a revolution of ideas to ride, and Locke's just getting started. So, just as Locke was getting the hang of his role as the intellectual fireworks guy, lighting up the sky of political thought, a little thing called the exclusion crisis came knocking on his door in the late 1670s. This was the drama du jour, revolving around whether James, Duke of York, should be excluded from the throne because of his Catholic faith. Let's just say, in a country where Protestantism was as much a national pastime as complaining about the weather, James was about as popular as a rain-soaked picnic. Now, Locke wasn't exactly a front-row seat kind of guy in this political theatre. He was more like the guy in the balcony, taking notes and preparing his next big act. But his association with Anthony Ashley Cooper, the Earl of Shaftesbury, and the anti-Catholic campaigner extraordinaire meant Locke was suddenly in the spotlight. Not the good kind of spotlight either, the kind that makes you think twice about your travel plans. Spoiler, it was time to pack his bags. In 1683, Locke found himself heading for the Netherlands, a move that was less about sightseeing and more about avoiding the political equivalent of a live grenade. The Netherlands was the 17th century equivalent of an intellectual Las Vegas. What happened there didn't necessarily stay there, but it was the place to be if you wanted to rub elbows with the who's who of European exiles. It was a hotbed of free thought, where being inquisitive didn't immediately get you a one-way ticket to the local dungeon. Locke's Dutch adventure was like a sabbatical on steroids. In Amsterdam, he mingled with exiled thinkers and Protestants, all united by their shared love of free speech and their shared disdain for the English monarchy. Picture it as the ultimate writer's retreat, minus the yoga sessions and overpriced coffee. Locke spent his time in the Netherlands refining his ideas, rubbing shoulders with fellow intellectuals while keeping a low profile because, avoiding arrest was still a top priority. While in the Netherlands, Locke was like a sponge, soaking up ideas and debates like a college freshman at a philosophy mixer. His stay coincided with the Dutch Golden Age, a period when art, science, trade, and intellectual thought were flourishing. The Dutch economy was booming, with Amsterdam as the hub of this prosperity. The city was a melting pot of cultures and ideas, a place where Locke could finally breathe without the stifling paranoia of political scandal. The Dutch were also dabbling in the art of religious tolerance, a concept as refreshing as a cool breeze on a hot day. Here, Locke could explore his ideas about religious freedom, which would later become a cornerstone of his work. And while he was there, Locke wasn't just a passive observer, he was actively engaging with the intellectual and economic shifts around him. This was a man who understood that property wasn't just about land, it was about opportunity and potential. But Locke's Dutch sojourn wasn't all sunshine and tulips. He had to tread carefully, as the political tides of Europe were as unpredictable as a cat on a hot tin roof. Yet, this period of exile was crucial. It was here, amidst the canals and coffee houses, that Locke penned some of his most significant works, including revisions of his 2 treatises of government. His time in the Netherlands was like a pressure cooker for his ideas, intensifying them until they were ready to be served to a waiting world. Fast forward to 1688, when the political landscape in England shifted once again. The Glorious Revolution was unfolding, a bloodless coup that was about as shocking as finding a surprise twist in a soap opera. James II was sent packing, and William of Orange, the Protestant saviour from the Netherlands, was invited to the English throne. It was the perfect blend of politics and pragmatism, and Locke was about to be part of it. Returning to England in 1689, Locke stepped back onto British soil with the cautious optimism of the man who's been given a second chance. The political climate was now more receptive to his ideas, and Locke found himself with a prime platform to influence the new government. It was like he'd been waiting in the wings for the perfect moment to step into the political spotlight. In this New England, Locke's ideas were not just controversial, they were revolutionary. The Glorious Revolution had set the stage for a constitutional monarchy, and Locke's theories on government and social contracts were suddenly all the rage. His thoughts on the power of the people and the limits of government were like a breath of fresh air in a country still reeling from the upheavals of the past decades. Locke's return was not just a personal triumph, it was a philosophical one. His ideas were now being debated and discussed at the highest levels of government, shaping policies and laying the groundwork for what we now recognize as liberal democracy. His work, particularly the two treatises, became an intellectual rallying cry for those advocating for civil liberties and the separation of church and state. But Locke's impact wasn't confined to the dusty halls of power. His ideas permeated society, influencing everything from education to economics. He proposed that education should be about developing a child's mind, not just filling it with facts. A revolutionary concept at a time when rote learning was the norm. And his views on property and economics laid the groundwork for modern capitalism, with the notion that labour was the foundation of property rights. Of course, Locke's ideas didn't always sit well with everyone. Traditionalists viewed his theories as subversive, a threat to the established order. But Locke, ever the steadfast thinker, knew that true progress often came with a side of controversy. He was reshaping not just philosophy, but the very fabric of society, challenging norms and advocating for a world where individual rights and government accountability were paramount. Locke's return to England marked the beginning of his legacy as a key figure in the development of modern Western thought. His ideas spread beyond England, influencing the American colonies and helping to shape the founding principles of the United States. It was as if Locke had planted seeds of revolution wherever he went, seeds that would grow into the towering trees of democracy and individual rights. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Locke's journey was far from over. He continued to write and debate, refining his ideas and engaging with the intellectual currents of his time. His work was not just a product of his era, but a catalyst for change, inspiring generations to question, challenge, and innovate. As we leave Locke at this pivotal moment, poised to shape the future of liberal democracy, we see a man who was not just a philosopher, but a revolutionary in his own right. His ideas were the spark that ignited a new way of thinking, a way that would reshape the world and continue to resonate through the centuries. And while Locke's story is still unfolding, one thing is clear. His legacy is a testament to the power of ideas to transcend time and transform societies. Stay tuned, because the revolution of thought is just getting started. So, as we stand on the brink of Locke's legacy, let's dive into how this philosophical heavyweight left his mark on modern political thought. If Locke were around today, he'd probably be sipping a latte in a hip cafe, watching the world debate his ideas on Twitter, blissfully unaware of just how far his musings about individual rights and governance would travel. First stop, the American Revolution. The late 18th century was a time when the 13 colonies decided they'd had enough of British rule, and Locke's ideas were like gasoline to the revolutionary fire. The colonists were fed up with being treated like the British monarchy's distant relatives, the kind who get invited to weddings but seated near the bathrooms. They craved independence, and Locke's thoughts on government by consent and the right to rebel against tyrants were like a rallying cry for freedom. Thomas Jefferson, that well-known Declaration of Independence scribe, was a big fan of Locke. In 1776, when Jefferson penned the immortal words "life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," he was channeling Locke's philosophy of natural rights. Except Locke had originally written life, liberty, and property. But hey, changing it to happiness gave it that extra zing. The colonists used Locke's framework to justify their rebellion, essentially telling King George III, "We're not breaking up with you, you're breaking up with us." Across the Atlantic, Locke's ideas were echoing in French salons, where thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau were stirring the pot of revolutionary thought. Fast forward to 1789, and the French Revolution was in full swing. The French people, tired of their own aristocratic shenanigans, took inspiration from Locke's emphasis on liberty and equality. Of course, the French took the revolution to its logical extreme, guillotines and all, but the influence of Locke's ideas was undeniable. Locke's blueprint for governance was like a universal language for those fighting tyranny. He wasn't advocating for chaos, mind you, but for a social contract where rulers were accountable to the people. This was radical in an era when monarchs saw themselves as God's gift to earth, literally. Locke was saying, hey, maybe the people should have a say in how they're governed, which was about as welcome to the ruling class as a cat at a dog convention. Now, let's tackle the myth of Locke as a solitary genius, scribbling revolutionary manifestos in a dusty garret. The truth is, he was more of a collaborator than a lone ranger. Locke was part of a vibrant intellectual network that included scientists, philosophers, and political activists. The Royal Society, where Locke rubbed elbows with the likes of Isaac Newton, was his intellectual playground. These were the folks who preferred dissecting ideas over dissecting frogs, though they probably did both just to keep things interesting. Locke's ideas didn't spring fully formed from his head like Athena from Zeus. They were the product of lively debates and exchanges with his contemporaries. It's a reminder that even the most brilliant ideas often need a little help from friends and maybe a glass of wine or two. So, while the myth of the solitary genius is romantic, the reality is that Locke was part of a broader movement that was challenging the status quo. Economically, Locke's ideas were rooted in the realities of his time. 17th century England was experiencing the early rumblings of capitalism, with trade and commerce reshaping society. Locke's thoughts on property were not just abstract musings, they were grounded in the economic shifts around him. He argued that property was a natural right derived from one's labour, a notion that would later become a cornerstone of capitalist economies. It was like suggesting that maybe people should actually own what they work for, a radical concept at the time. But Locke's legacy isn't just about political revolutions and economic theories. His ideas have seeped into the very fabric of modern society, influencing debates about freedom, governance, and individual rights. Today, when we talk about human rights, privacy, or government accountability, we're echoing Locke's philosophy, even if we don't realize it. His vision of a society where individuals have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness continues to resonate, serving as a reminder that the fight for freedom and equality is ongoing. Locke's ideas also laid the groundwork for the Enlightenment, a period when reason and evidence started to outshine superstition and tradition. It was like swapping out a dusty old library for a high-tech think tank. Philosophers began to question everything, from the nature of the universe to the best kind of government. Locke's emphasis on empiricism and observation was at the heart of this intellectual revolution, inspiring a generation of thinkers to explore new frontiers of knowledge. And let's not forget Locke's impact on education. He believed that education should be about nurturing a child's potential, not just filling their heads with facts. His work, Some Thoughts Concerning Education, published in 1693, laid out a vision for an educational system that emphasized critical thinking and practical skills. It was a radical departure from the rote memorization of the time, and it laid the foundation for modern educational practices. In the end, Locke's legacy is a testament to the power of ideas to transcend time and transform societies. His thoughts on government, rights, and human understanding have shaped the contours of modern political thought, influencing everything from constitutions to classroom curricula. And while Locke may not have been a solitary genius, his contributions to philosophy were nothing short of revolutionary. So, as we wrap up our journey through Locke's life and legacy, let's take a moment to appreciate the lasting impact of his ideas. In a world that continues to grapple with questions of freedom, equality, and governance, Locke's philosophy remains as relevant as ever. His vision of a society where individuals have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a reminder that the fight for a just and equitable world is far from over. And while Locke's story may have ended centuries ago, his ideas continue to inspire and challenge us today. So, the next time you find yourself in a debate about politics or governance, tip your hat to John Locke, the philosopher who dared to dream of a better world and gave us the tools to build it. You're jolted awake by the distant echoes of howler monkeys and the rising sun casting its first light over the dense Yucatan jungle. It's another day as a Mayan priestess in the 9th century. No pressure, right? Your morning doesn't start with a leisurely scroll through a feed, but with a ritual that connects you to both the cosmos and the cornfields. As the birds announce dawn, you wrap yourself in intricately woven textiles, each pattern a story, a lineage, a divine connection. First on the agenda is the jade jewelry, your badge of office. Not just a pretty accessory, these emerald stones are believed to house the breath of life itself. In the Mayan world, jade is worth its weight in gold, quite literally. It's your iPhone and presidential seal rolled into one. As you adorn yourself, you might chuckle at the idea of modern folks wearing plastic beads and calling it fashion. Next, it's time to light the incense. Copal resin, sticky and aromatic, curls smoke skyward in spirals that seem to dance. This is your cosmic Wi-Fi, a fragrant hotline to the gods. With every curl of smoke, you're not only purifying the air, but also setting the stage for the rituals that will guide the day. It's all about keeping those divine bars full, ensuring that your spiritual signal remains strong. Now, let's talk calendars. Forget the Gregorian one, with its simple months and days. You're working with the Tzolk'in and the Harb, two calendrical systems that make rocket science look like a kid's puzzle. The Tzolk'in is a 260-day ceremonial calendar, while the Harb is a 365-day solar calendar. The two together create a cycle called the calendar round, spanning 52 years. And you thought your Outlook calendar was complicated. Deciphering these calendars isn't just about picking the right day for a barbecue. It's about timing everything from agricultural cycles to war declarations. As you trace your fingers over the stone glyphs, you're reminded of the ridiculous notion that ancient peoples were somehow less sophisticated than we are today. If they could see our bewilderment over daylight saving time, they'd laugh us out of the temple. And speaking of temples, yours is more than a place of worship, it's a hub of economic activity. Running it involves logistics that would make a modern-day supply chain manager break out in a cold sweat. Let's talk tortillas. To keep the temple running, you need an annual supply of 50,000 corn tortillas. That's roughly 130 hours a day, assuming a year without any extra feast days or unexpected guests. Forget about Taco Tuesdays, every day is tortilla day. But where do all these tortillas come from? Tribute. Every village in the region has its quota, contributing not just corn but also cacao, textiles, and even the occasional jade trinket. It's a complex system of give and take, one that maintains the delicate balance of power. You don't just collect tribute, you manage it, distribute it, and use it to ensure everyone knows exactly who's sitting pretty at the top of the social pyramid. Being a priestess isn't just about spiritual duties, it's a full-time gig with serious political heft. Your role is pivotal in connecting the divine realm with the earthly one, acting as the intermediary. You're the ancient equivalent of a combination of ambassador, accountant, and spiritual counselor. And in a society that reveres the cyclical nature of time, your ability to interpret the will of the gods is as crucial as the seasons themselves. As you get ready to step into the day, you might ponder the mythological tales that have wrapped themselves around your culture like vines over a temple ruin. The romanticized view of the Mayan priesthood often skips the gritty details. Sure, there are tales of grandeur, celestial insights, and mystical powers. But there's also the daily grind of maintaining a complex economy, diplomatic finesse, and the ever-present risk of political upheaval. It's a world where myth and reality intertwine, making you both a figure of reverence and a player in a high-stakes game of thrones. With the sun now fully risen, it's time to put theory into practice. The temple courtyard is bustling with activity, the pulse of a civilization at its peak. You head out, ready to play your part in this grand tapestry, where every action is imbued with meaning, every decision a thread in the weave of history. And off you go, from the temple's sacred shadow into the bustling heart of the Mayan marketplace. If you think your local farmer's market is lively, you've clearly never dodged a swarm of traders haggling over the price of a turkey. Here, the air is a rich tapestry of sounds and smells, spices mingling with the sharp tang of freshly cut fruit, all undercut by the constant hum of barter and exchange. Now let's talk economy. Because believe it or not, even in the 9th century Yucatan, You couldn't escape capitalism's early roots. Step aside. Bitcoin. This is the land of cacao beans as currency. That's right. Those little nuggets of chocolatey goodness were worth their weight in, well, not gold, but certainly a decent meal. Forget about carrying a wallet here. You're jingling with beans, and not the musical kind. But it's not all about cacao. Oh no, the marketplace is alive with colour, especially those iridescent quetzal feathers. A single quetzal feather could command the price of an entire woven garment. It's like the Mayan equivalent of an Hermes scarf, except, it might also be used in a ceremonial headdress that connects you to the divine. Talk about multi-purpose luxury. Now, let's debunk a charming myth, the noble trader. Picture a suave, well-dressed merchant commanding respect and admiration. Yeah, not quite. In reality, these traders were more like hustlers, often engaged in fierce negotiations that could rival modern-day Wall Street brokers. Barter was the name of the game, and everyone was playing to win. You'd be hard-pressed to find a straightforward exchange without a side-eye glance or raised eyebrow. And speaking of glances, let's not forget the critical role of women in this bustling marketplace. Far from being mere bystanders, women often ran the stalls and managed the intricate web of trade negotiations. In fact, priestesses like yourself wielded significant influence here. Spiritual counsel was a valuable commodity, and your insights into the will of the gods might just tip the scales on a tricky trade deal. Who knew spiritual advice could double as economic strategy? Take that, modern financial advisors. You see, in a world where every decision could ripple through the social and economic fabric, your guidance wasn't just sought after, it was essential. Forget LinkedIn endorsements. Your reputation as a priestess and economic influencer, before it was cool, carried weight. So, when you advised a trader on the best time to exchange their cacao for textiles or jade, it was more than a suggestion, it was practically divine mandate. The marketplace wasn't just a chaotic bazaar, it was a microcosm of the Mayan world, reflecting its complexities and contradictions. The myth of the peaceful and prosperous trade network is just that, a myth. The reality was a vibrant, often cutthroat environment where social standing and economic savvy were constantly in play. The stakes were high, and every transaction was a dance of strategy and intuition. But let's not get too caught up in the romance of it all. Sure, there's an undeniable charm to the idea of a bustling market filled with exotic goods and colourful characters, but behind the vibrant facade lay a harsh reality, one where droughts or political upheaval could send prices spiralling and leave traders scrambling to adapt. The market was a living, breathing entity, subject to the whims of nature and the caprices of human ambition. As you navigate through the marketplace, the pulse of commerce echoes around you, each transaction a reminder of the intricate web of life that the Mayans wove. Here, amidst the tumult and trade, you're not just a spectator, you're an integral thread in this grand tapestry, binding the spiritual with the economic, the divine with the mundane. And in this world, every decision, every piece of advice is a step in the ongoing dance of history. So, with this vibrant scene unfolding around you, remember that while the myths are captivating, the reality is far more intricate and compelling. The marketplace is more than just a place to buy and sell. It's a stage where the drama of human ingenuity and survival plays out daily, with you right in the thick of it, guiding the way with wisdom as timeless as the stars. And as you step away from the marketplace's tumult, the sun climbs higher, nudging you toward the midday ritual that isn't exactly inscribed on any stele, lunch with the local rulers. It's a gathering where tortillas and turkeys aren't the only things on the menu. Politics and power are the main courses. So, let's dive into the deliciously complex power dynamics that are as layered as your grandmother's lasagna. Forget the notion of the priest kings lounging peacefully in their temples, sipping cacao like it's a Mayan Starbucks. The reality? More Game of Thrones than the Lion King? As a priestess, your role isn't just spiritual, it's deeply entwined with the political machinations of the day. You're not just interpreting the god's will, you're navigating alliances, marriages, and rivalries that could make a soap opera look tame. Let's talk about those strategic marriages. We're not discussing a love story for the ages here. This is about securing power, land, and influence. Think of it as ancient networking, where the stakes are a bit higher than a LinkedIn connection. A priestess might find herself advising on or even partaking in these unions. After all, What's a little romance when the future of your city-state is on the line? And speaking of alliances, it's crucial to understand the delicate balance of power that kept the Mayan world spinning. City-states like Tikal, Calakmul, and Copan weren't just trading partners, they were frenemies, each vying for supremacy. One minute you're exchanging jade trinkets, the next you might be plotting to outmaneuver them in the next political chess match. Remember, these alliances were as fragile as a ceramic vase at a toddler's birthday party. So, what about the priest kings themselves? Surely they were the benevolent rulers depicted in legends, right? Hate to break it to you, but the reality is less Disney, more Machiavelli. These leaders were master strategists, wielding their priestly roles to legitimize their rule. Ceremonial duties and divine connections were tools of governance, not just spiritual exercises. And to the Popol Vuh, the sacred text that shaped much of Mayan mythology and political narrative. This isn't just a collection of bedtime stories, it's a political manifesto wrapped in allegory. The Popol Vuh provided the ideological framework that leaders used to justify their actions, drawing on divine legitimacy to consolidate power. It was the ancient equivalent of a political spin doctor, crafting narratives that upheld the status quo while keeping the masses in line. But let's not get too swept up in the grandeur. The myth of the all-powerful, all-knowing ruler is just that, a myth. These leaders were operating in a world where failure could mean the end of their reign, or worse. The political landscape was a minefield, with each decision potentially triggering a cascade of events that could unravel the delicate tapestries of power. As you sit down for this midday meal, you're not just breaking bread, you're breaking down barriers, building alliances, and perhaps even hatching a plan or two. The table is laden with food, but it's the undercurrent of ambition and strategy that truly fills the air. Your insights, gleaned from the gods and the marketplace alike, are invaluable in these discussions. You're not just a priestess. You're a power broker in a world where every word, every gesture could shift the balance. And let's not forget the economic realities underpinning these power plays. Tribute systems, trade routes, and resource control were the lifeblood of Mayan politics. The rulers seated around you aren't just interested in spiritual guidance. They're keenly aware of the economic implications of every alliance and every conflict. It's a delicate dance between divine favor and material wealth, where the priestess's role is pivotal. With each bite of maize or sip of chocolate, you're reminded that the stories told in the Popol Vuh aren't just tales of gods and heroes, they're reflections of the very real struggles and triumphs of human nature. The myths may capture our imaginations, but it's the gritty reality of politics and power that shaped the Mayan world. As the meal winds down, the discussions shift from grand strategies to the mundane details of governance. Who knew that ruling a city-state involved so much paperwork? Yet here you are, balancing celestial calendars with the nitty-gritty of tax collection and resource allocation. It's a testament to the complexities of Mayan life, where even the divine had to contend with the decidedly earthly. And as the sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across the temple courtyard, you rise from the table, your mind buzzing with the day's conversations. The intricate web of alliances and rivalries stretches out before you, a tapestry woven with the threads of history, myth, and human ambition. You're not just a participant in this grand narrative, you're a storyteller, shaping the future with each word and action. So, as you step back into the vibrant heart of the city, remember that while the myths are captivating, it's the messy, beautiful reality of human endeavor that truly endures. The Mayan world was a place of contradictions and complexities, where the divine and the mundane coexisted in a dance as old as time itself. And in this dance, you're not just a spectator, you're a key player, guiding the steps and shaping the story that will be told for generations to come. As you step back into the vibrant heart of the city, the buzz of the marketplace fades behind you, replaced by the hush of anticipation that fills the temple grounds. The sun's descent signals more than just the end of a day. It's the prelude to an evening of celestial choreography that only the Mayans could pull off with such aplomb. Tonight, the stars aren't just twinkling dots in the sky, they're the lead actors in a cosmic drama, and you're backstage, readying for the performance of a lifetime. In the Mayan world, astronomy and religion are the ultimate power couple. They're as inseparable as a Netflix binge and a comfy couch. This is the time when myths of the all-knowing astronomer priest take center stage. But let's be real for a second. Those myths are as polished as a politician's campaign promises. The truth? It's a bit more trial and error than divine insight. Think of it as celestial guesswork with a dash of faith. Now, don't get me wrong. Mayan astronomy was no amateur hour. They had a 365-day solar calendar, the Harb, which was as accurate as your grandmother's pie recipe. This wasn't just for show, it was a practical tool for planting crops and planning wars. And let's not forget the Zolkine, the 260-day calendar that would make modern scheduling apps look like child's play. These calendars interlocked like cosmic gears, creating a 52-year cycle known as the calendar round. If you're struggling to remember your anniversary, imagine keeping track of that beast. As you prepare for the evening ceremony, the temple's stone observatory becomes your domain. Here, the blend of science and spirituality is as thick as the copal incense swirling through the air. You're not just gazing at the heavens, you're reading them like an ancient, star-studded text. And while the myth suggests you have it all figured out, the truth is, you're more like a cosmic detective piecing together clues. Let's talk about the real science behind those celestial predictions. The Mayans didn't have telescopes, but they made up for it with keen observation skills that would put any modern astronomer to shame. They tracked the movements of Venus with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, using its cycle to predict everything from agricultural seasons to, you guessed it, war. Venus wasn't just a pretty light in the sky, it was a celestial stopwatch counting down to key events. But here's where the myth and reality diverge like a poorly chosen fork in the road. The idea of infallible astronomer priests is as fanciful as a unicorn in a tutu. The predictions were based on observable patterns, sure, but they were also subject to the whims of fate and the occasional miscalculation. It was a balancing act between science and the divine, where even the most skilled could find themselves tripping over the very stars they revered. As you adjust your jade jewelry, each piece catching the fading sunlight like a collection of emerald constellations, the preparations for the evening ceremony reach a fever pitch. The community gathers, their faces lit by the glow of countless flickering torches. Tonight's ceremony isn't just about celestial admiration, it's a social event with as much political significance as a royal wedding. Let's be honest, the stars could be a little temperamental. You've got to wonder how many times a priestess was left awkwardly explaining why a much-anticipated eclipse decided to no-show. But hey, if modern meteorologists can get away with predicting a sunny weekend that turns into a monsoon, surely a hiccup in star predictions is forgivable. The Mayans knew better than anyone that the universe had its own sense of humor. In a society where every celestial event was loaded with political implications, your role is more crucial than ever. You're not just interpreting the cosmos, you're weaving its messages into the fabric of human affairs. Planting seasons, harvests, and even the fate of rulers could hinge on your interpretations. It's like being a divine translator, where one misplaced glyph could mean the difference between prosperity and famine. The observatory, with its open roof and perfectly aligned stones, is your stage. The stars are your script, and as the community waits with bated breath, you step forward, ready to unveil the cosmic secrets that only you can decipher. But let's not sugarcoat it. This is as much about showmanship as it is about science. You've got to sell the spectacle, even if the stars aren't quite cooperating. The crowd's anticipation is palpable, their eyes reflecting the flickering flames like a sea of tiny mirrors. This isn't just a ritual, it's a moment that binds them to their ancestors, to the divine, and to the very land they tread upon. As you raise your arms, the night sky unfolds its tapestry above you. It's a dance of light and shadow, a celestial symphony that echoes through the ages. Now, you might be wondering how these celestial observations translated into practical uses. Well, the Mayans were nothing if not pragmatic. Their astronomical prowess was not just for spiritual enlightenment, it had tangible benefits that kept society ticking like a well-oiled cosmic machine. By predicting the cycles of the sun and moon, they could synchronize agricultural activities, ensuring that crops were sown and harvested at just the right times. And let's not overlook the political angle. A well-timed celestial event could legitimize a ruler's power, reinforcing their divine right to lead. It was a cosmic endorsement, like getting a celestial thumbs up from the universe. The stars weren't just a backdrop, they were active participants in the ongoing drama of Mayan life. As the ceremony unfolds, you can't help but marvel at the complexity of it all. The myths, the science, the politics, it's a tangled web that somehow, miraculously, manages to hold together. It's a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of understanding, even when the answers are as elusive as the stars themselves. And so, as the night deepens and the ceremony draws to a close, you're left with a sense of awe at the intricate dance of history and myth, reality and legend. The Mayan world was a place of contradictions, where the divine and the mundane coexisted in a delicate balance. And as you step away from the temple, the weight of your role as a bridge between worlds settles on your shoulders, as timeless and enduring as the stars above. The evening's celestial spectacle may be over, but the story is far from finished. The stars will continue their eternal dance, and you'll be there, deciphering their secrets and weaving them into the rich tapestry of Mayan life. As you look up at the night sky, you're reminded that while the myths are captivating, it's the messy, beautiful reality of human endeavour that truly endures. And in this dance, you're not just a spectator, you're a key player, guiding the steps and shaping the story that will be told for generations to come. As the night sky fades into the first hues of dawn, the grand evening ceremony leaves behind an air thick with the mingling scents of incense and expectation. It's a tapestry of celestial wonder and earthly grit, woven together with threads of performance and power. The Mayans didn't just gaze at the stars, they orchestrated a cosmic ballet where every movement had a purpose, every ritual, a role in the grand strategy of societal cohesion. Let's not sugarcoat it. The notion of serene, unbroken rituals is as fanciful as a unicorn at a traffic light. The reality? It was a spectacle, yes, but one peppered with the harsh truths of human sacrifice and political maneuvering. Not exactly your average Sunday service. Human sacrifice was the grim crescendo in the symphony of Mayan rituals. It wasn't just about appeasing the gods, it was a visceral reminder of the priesthood's power over life and death, a stark demonstration of authority that kept the populace in check. Now, before you start conjuring up images of heart-ripping priests with gleaming obsidian blades, let's inject some context. The romanticized view of these sacrifices often glosses over their political undertones. In a society where divine favor was as valuable as gold, these rituals served to reinforce the status quo. They were acts of political theater, designed to project strength and stability in a world where both were as elusive as a Mayan jaguar in the jungle. But here's the kicker. These rituals, brutal as they were, played a crucial role in maintaining public morale. In a world teetering on the edge of chaos, the visible hand of divine approval was a comforting constant. It was the Mayan equivalent of a royal decree, stamped with the blood of the chosen, ensuring that order would prevail over anarchy. The Mayan priesthood understood the power of spectacle better than a Hollywood director. Their ceremonies were immersive experiences, blending the divine with the dramatic to create a narrative that resonated with the people. It was a masterclass in ancient propaganda, where every ritual, every sacrifice, was a chapter in the story of their civilization's divine mandate. Even the architecture, the towering pyramids and echoing plazas, served as monumental backdrops to these performances, reinforcing the grandeur and gravity of the events unfolding. And let's take a moment to appreciate the logistical feat of it all. Organizing these grand ceremonies was akin to planning a modern-day Olympics with a fraction of the resources and none of the corporate sponsorship. The priestesses and priests were the ultimate event planners, juggling celestial schedules with earthly demands to ensure that everything aligned perfectly. Imagine the chaos if a sacrifice was mistimed or if the constellations failed to cooperate. It was a high-wire act that required precision, faith, and a little bit of luck. As the echoes of the ceremony linger like the distant hum of a crowd, you are left to ponder the lasting legacy of these cultural practices. The Mayans may have slipped into history's shadows, but their influence endures in ways both profound and subtle. Their understanding of time, for instance, was nothing short of revolutionary. While we fuss over our Gregorian calendars and daylight saving time, the Mayans were plotting out intricate cycles that spanned centuries. It was a cosmic calendar that connected the past, present, and future in a way that still leaves us scratching our heads. Their legacy isn't just etched in stone or embedded in the jungle ruins, it's woven into the very fabric of modern spirituality and identity. The Mayans viewed time as cyclical, a series of endless loops that reflected the rhythms of nature and the cosmos. This perspective challenges our linear view of time and suggests a deeper connection between humanity and the universe. It's a philosophy that's finding new resonance in today's world as we grapple with our place in an ever-expanding cosmos. And let's talk about the Mayan influence on modern spirituality. Their rituals and beliefs have inspired countless interpretations, from New Age movements to contemporary indigenous practices. The idea of connecting with the divine through ceremonial acts, of finding meaning in the stars and the cycles of nature, continues to captivate us. In a world that's often dictated by the ticking of clocks and the hum of technology, the Mayan approach offers a profound reminder of the beauty and mystery that lie beyond our immediate perception. As you step away from the temple, the morning sun casting long shadows across the ancient stones, you're reminded that the Mayan legacy is more than just a collection of myths and ruins. It's a testament to human ingenuity, to our relentless pursuit of understanding and our enduring quest for meaning. It's a story that continues to unfold, one that invites us to look beyond the surface and explore the depths of human experience. So, as you walk through the remnants of this once great civilization, carrying the echoes of their rituals and the whispers of their gods, remember that while the myths are enchanting, it's the reality of their achievements that truly inspires. The Mayans may have vanished from the jungles of the Yucatan, but their spirit lives on, a testament to the power of performance, the potency of belief, and the profound connection between humanity and the cosmos. In the end, the Mayan story isn't just one of ancient rituals and celestial wonders. It's a reminder of the complexity and resilience of human culture, of our capacity to create meaning in a world that's often as unpredictable as the stars themselves. And in this grand tapestry of history, we are all weavers, adding our threads to the intricate design that spans both time and space. As the sun rises over the horizon, casting its golden light on the ancient stones, you're left with a sense of awe at the enduring legacy of the Mayans, a legacy that challenges us to look beyond the myths and embrace the beautiful, messy reality of our shared human journey.